Like with every constituent World of Darkness lore element that I do a deep dive on, and let me tell you, this is indeed a deep dive, because this is lore so deep, you can't escape it. I was a bit apprehensive at first to get into Changeling the Dreaming, but now that I can confidently say really that I absolutely love it. In fact, it may be my favorite entry into the World of Darkniverse, and it's not just because I find its fundamental themes very relatable. It's a bit of a standout, because it's not just grim and noir and gothic, it's actually quite flamboyant and whimsical, very light-hearted at times, and full of wonderful and unexpected things to discover at every turn. Which doesn't mean that it doesn't fit into the World of Darkness, because it's still, quite serious, it's still very punk, it deals with a very dark, very existential subject matter that I personally am rather drawn to, because my entire existence essentially revolves around a fascination with the power of human imagination. Not to mention that this is a game about dreams. And dreams also include nightmares. Look, if you can wait 3 years for Frederick Knutson's 5-hour video, you can wait like 2 months for my 3-hour one. Meanwhile, in Changeling, reality is rather a wishy-washy concept, because this game is all about the mundane world's intersection with the world of the dreaming. And the dreaming is exactly as coherent as you'd think, given that it is made up of humanity's, made-up stuff. It is an unfathomably vast dimension, separate from the umbral realms that I've discussed in my mage video. The higher, the middle, the lower umbra, all of those places are accessible through the mysterious paths that permeate the dreaming, which are known as trods. So the dreaming sort of exists in parallel to all three of those layers, cosmologically speaking. Like, you have the layers and you have the dreaming, and there are solid theories that it's more like an outgrowth of the upper umbra, the realm of thoughts and ideas. But as with so many mysteries in the World of Darkness, we may never know for certain. Essentially, everything that every human being, and potentially not humans too, by which I mean animals possessed of an imagination, have ever imagined manifests in the alternate dimension that is the dreaming. This is every daydream of a car you have while walking down the street. You see a car, you think, all those stupid little ideas that you come up with when you're zoned out that you immediately forget about again. They all manifest in the dreaming. And of course, at night when you sleep, an explosion of dream stuff creation occurs as every oh-so unimportant background element of your dream comes to life. The word dream is widely defined here. It does not need to be unconscious. Purposeful creative thought also becomes part of the dreaming, which, yes, does mean that Slenderman is explicitly canon in Changeling the Dreaming. Like, I'm not joking, it's literally in the book. And the same is true about your hopes, your aspirations, your thoughts of food when you're hungry, your thoughts of a comfortable blanket when you are in pelting rain, your thoughts about becoming successful when you're surrounded by poverty. It's sort of the mind's ability to conceptualize things that are not as they are, but as they might be, that creates the dreaming. Not all things imagined become part of the dreaming, especially nowadays that banality permeates the world. Fragments of dream stuff like that brown bear pen you remember from your childhood, which was a black bear pen, but who cares? You remember it as a brown bear pen. If you think about it in a playground, it will survive longer than if you think about it in an office cubicle. But it's still alone, it's prone to being washed away no matter where it is. Unless by sheer chance, it clusters up with other fragments of dream stuff to create a little island, which is much more likely to happen in places where many dreams are dreamt. These fragments make up the nearest dreaming, as I like to call it. In truth, there is no real name for it. It's free-floating glamour in the mundane world, the autumn world, as changelings call it. But only beings attuned to the ways of glamour can actually see it. It may be that one of these drifting islands manages to run into the near-dreaming, the first of the dream realms, which are not separate realms at all. The dreaming is a spectrum that goes deeper and deeper in. These classifications are mostly a matter of convenience. Crossing between realms while traveling along trods can be as sudden as a clear break, or it can be, you know when you've taken mushrooms, but you're not sure they've hit yet until the precise moment where you definitely are certain that now they are working. Except, what I just said also isn't entirely true. There's always some kind of threshold, and often you will probably notice it. The near dreaming is nearest the autumn world, separated from it by the mists of forgetfulness, an outer membrane of sorts that sort of protects the dreaming from the rational disbelief of banality by, ironically, making people rationalize away many of the unbelievable things they see manifesting in the autumn world because they cross over from the dreaming. The mists do exist farther into the dreaming as well and demarcate the boundaries between its various layers, organizing them in a way they used to not be organized in, creating order in a place where order is anathema to existence in order to protect it from the anathema of order. The mists can be permeated only by things that have glamour in them, and the first time you cross them, you enter the near dreaming, an amped up alternate version of the real world, usually corresponding vaguely, pretty closely often with it, because, things that you often see are things you often imagine. A way in which it parallels the Shadowlands from Wraith the Oblivion, except, of course, those are made of memories, not dreams, and so that's things remembered of. And among the things reflected in the near dreaming, the more impressive and important to the humans imagining them they appear, the more, striking and hyper-real they are in the near dreaming. It's the amount of meaning that they have that defines this. That big neon sign on top of the cinema is so enormous that it blots out the sky like a second sun in the night. The dark alleyway the city has consistently failed to light is a black moor between brick buildings, and you can feel its hot and humid garbage breath on your skin when you go near it. Make out the red-eyed giant rat scurrying around its barely concealed teeth. The old fountain on the edge of town over there, defunct for decades, is alive and burbling, feeding a giant mirror pool reflecting the faces of smiling gods in the clouds. You could step into it, but who knows what's on the other side. The characters you're going to play in this game spend a lot of time in the near dreaming. It protects them from the worst storms of reality, and by that I mean banality. They find ways of entering and exploring, usually seeking respite, but also often seeking trods that lead deeper into the dreaming. These trods usually defy reality, helping them cross vast distances in the blink of an eye, provided they keep to the safety of the Silver Path, which is the sort of main, line, when you play a racing game, the main racing line, often, trods do like to stray, into areas that, where the protection of the Silver Path does not hold as much. But of course, the deeper the quest, the greater the reward, ? And this way, they may eventually find themselves in the far dreaming, a realm now truly made up of the kinds of complex and elaborate dreams that you dream at night. The geography here is chaotic and ever-changing. The laws of reality no longer hold, and thus the wildest, most unpredictable shit can happen, even if you do stick to the silver path of whatever trod you are on. It may lead you into a forest made of mushrooms, filled with stellar nebulae, where the rain is made of shooting stars that can shatter the glass bodies of those mushrooms, which will often release gaseous elementals contained within, which would love nothing more than to lash out against the solid-bodied travelers they are jealous of. Or perhaps you'd find yourself in the endless and illogical oppressive concrete halls of a police station without windows. You're not supposed to be here, and the cops patrolling the hallways, which are actually uniformed rotting zombie monkeys, try to circumvent what little protections the Silver Path still holds in order to beat the living shit out of you and throw you behind one of those doors, which are not actually really doors, but they're holes made of liquid shadow. It could also be that you'll find yourself in an old town under a golden sky, warm air on your skin, ancient houses made of gingerbread and overgrown with vines laden with colourful grapes, each containing 1,000 different flavors. There's a clock tower in the middle of this village, humming melodies to itself that you always recognize but can't quite place. And if you climb it, you can see the endless expanse of green rolling hills around. The riches found in the far dreaming are very valuable and often powerful. Entire ecosystems of dream stuff exist out there, with dream tigers eating dream rabbits, only to be decomposed by dream mushrooms when they die, which then feed dream trees. Changelings can harvest these dream trees, but their wood, often smells like cotton candy. Or they can cultivate the mushrooms, but they, sometimes explode and spew fire like little volcanoes. Or they can make a rug from the tiger's fur, but the patterns on it will change with the time of day. Or they can make charms out of the rabbit's bones, but those bones sometimes quiver and fart. If you want more reliable materials, go back to the near dreaming, because here there truly be dragons. All of this is assuming the reality-rending storm known as the Furclis doesn't show up. At best, it will strip dreams of some of the elements and replace them with others. That's okay. But at worst, it will completely rip apart and reshape everything around you, potentially even pick you up and throw you far, far the fuck away. If you want to be safe from that, you ought to stick to the stable places if you can. Which, they're more consistent because they're informed by the repeating collective dreams of humanity. Though that in and of itself, it may range from a lush palace in the desert, the oasis type stuff, to literal actual hell where you will get spit roasted by fucking demons. In the far dreaming, following certain trods, you may run into a wall of fog. Now, this may not look like fog, it may be a sheer cliff face or a closed, regal-looking gate, but it is the last layer of the mist, the wall to the true inner sanctum of the dreaming, the vast and endless expanse of the deep dreaming. It's a place you've experienced in your most abstract dreams, the kind of dreams where, you may be able to remember impressions of, but the impressions of which you are never able to put into words. It's the place where concepts exist in their most stripped down form, but also, at their borderless way, bleeding into each other to form reflections of places that are really just ideas, like beholding a chair as a chair, fully cognizant of the spaces between the atoms, or watching me looking at you right now, knowing that this bookshelf, this is a real place, but you also perceive the individual rays of light that create the illusion of me in whatever bathroom you are currently in. You better be a slow shitter because this video has a few more hours left in it. Here you travel on the spokes of a clock, moving to the edges so you can find the center. Always careful not to count how many numbers there actually are, because they are not numbers. They are the faces of those same gods you saw in the pond earlier, except now they look completely different. You just know they're the same, like dream logic style. And did you in fact see them at all, or is the memory of having seen them something you just made up right then? What is real life even? And what is the point of thinking about time anyway when you are walking on a literal, or rather figurative, conceptual clock? Where the fuck are we even trying to get to? There are places here, quite a few of them actually, the purest of all places. Elemental realms, from fire to silence to love. If you are not of these places, and notice I'm saying of these places, not from these places, most of them will just rip you apart. You can go beyond every black hole in the universe if you find the way, and if you move deep enough, you will encounter the singular point of concentrated infinity from whence all the universe sprang through time. And also everything that's behind that. The places we care about because we conceptualize them are areas like Atlantis and Shambhala, the Sea of Silver, the Slow Empires, the Great Engine, and perhaps most importantly to us as players of this particular game, Arcadia, the homeland of the Kiths. Impossible to find and even impossibler to enter, so why even bother? The true fate of Arcadia is where our characters' immortal souls came from, but we can remember none of it, only that it has, for whatever reason, rejected us, and will never let us back in to protect itself from the banality that we are forever tainted with because we were cast out. Perhaps it is a paradise beyond compare. Perhaps we're trying to board a sinking ship. All we can do is imagine. In the dreaming, all of the, different layers of it, a lot of different kinds of beings have manifested from the collective imagination of humanity, one type of which is fairies, which according to their own lore, once upon a time, used to rule the earth and the whole universe until it became too inhospitable for them. Because unlike their home plane, the real world is not made up of dreams. It certainly is the wellspring of those dreams, but it's a world where possibilities are not endless, as quite ironically, countless scholars became more and more fond of saying, the people with the biggest minds. And it's a world in the grip of cold iron, and, I don't know why they call it cold iron, it's just regular iron. Point is, all that shit terribly deadly to fairies. So in order to survive in our world of darkness, many fairies decided to use an ancient ritual to bind themselves to a mortal human body and became what we now know as changelings. Okay, so yes, changelings are human beings with fairy souls. That's what the game is about. The human body is adapted to life in banality because it's of banality, in the sense that it's just literally not affected by it. It does carry a little bit of banality by association, but that is, better than destruction. You can hit a human body with cold iron and the fae inside will be fine-ish, as opposed to just being ripped apart immediately. And banality is, it's banality. It's the office job, the tax return, the endless, boring fucking routine of life where only the dry facts matter and nothing is special. Everything is just quantified and explained. It has all the mysticism squeezed out of it. It's also the destruction of hopes and aspirations, the part of growing up where you just accept that you're going to spend your life being miserable because you have to be realistic about what you can do. You give up on love, stop pursuing your lofty goals that you had, spend more and more time embroiled in the draining trivialities of middle-class gossip and water-cooler humor. It's the memory of that cool bear pen that you had, ripped apart by the realization that you shouldn't be wasting your time thinking about such childish nonsense. All of these things separate us, the dreamers, from the dreaming. We cease manifesting the dreaming into the world the more banality we have. We deny the existence of things that cannot be explained, and by merging their souls with a vessel that sort of naturally exists in this spiritually dead environment, changelings can survive. The major price of this is, of course, that changelings are not immortal, which the pure fae used to be. They're tied to human bodies, which age, wither, and die. We all know this, and release then their souls for another go on the great karmic merry-go-round to be reborn into a new child. This doesn't replace the soul of the child, by the way. The child just then has a fairy soul, just to make that clear, right? It may then be an odd child, but you're still just a child with a fairy soul, until the point in your life in which you undergo the process known as chrysalis, the true birth of a changeling, when the fairy soul inside awakens anew. This is a very loud and quiet process, a violent outburst of internal contemplation. Basically, over the course of weeks and months, you would start feeling like you're losing touch with reality because you hallucinate shit that isn't there. There might be a group of cats conspiratorially trading whiffs of cigarette smoke with each other, a giant jellyfish cloud fluorescing in the night sky, or a storm swirling around inside a perfume bottle at the airport duty-free shop. Although, of course, most of the people who go through chrysalis are children, so they wouldn't really understand what the airport duty-free shop is, because even if you do have a fairy soul, chances of awakening drastically decrease as you get older, though they never go away fully. This is you getting in tune with the dual reality of the dreaming, beginning to generate and absorb an infusion of glamour that will awaken the fae inside of you in a single powerful moment that is the chrysalis proper, during which you have a perfectly clear understanding of yourself, what you are, all the lives you've lived, all the dreams you've dreamt, all the magics you've mastered, which you will then immediately forget. It's, it's like waking up from a dream. It's, you keep some of the fragments, some of the impressions of that. It's a particularly vivid dream, of course. But the more you grasp for them, the more they seem to disappear. Banality, or rather the veil of mists that is supposed to protect the dreaming from the encroachment of banality, has closed in after your initial outburst. But that's okay, because other changelings are bound to have noticed this, and they're gonna go find you, and unless you're like extremely unlucky, protect you. They have a system called fosterage, where one or more people, they agree to sort of take you in and show you the ways of the world, help you get in touch with your fey self, until eventually, after like a year or so, all of your newfound friends celebrate your seining with you, where you finish your chrysalis and finally learn your true fairy name, which you then better keep to your fucking self. There's power in fairy names, is what I'm trying to say. The beginning of your chrysalis, and rarely events that occurred during your fosterage, will have generated a whole number of magical little objects for you, or rather transformed things that matter to you, like before chrysalis, into chimerical objects, as they're called. Chimerical objects are objects that exist both in the real world and the dreaming, the world that changelings see, or rather see as well, because they are inherently dual beings and perceive both the real world and the dream elements within it shining through at the same time. This includes your Faemien, which is your appearance as fairy. Mortal seeming and Faemien are somewhat alike, but there can be stark differences in height, color, build, the sound of your voice, clothes that you wear. And you're both of these things in equal parts. There's no, like, separation in any meaningful sense, aside from that one is a dreaming aspect, and you perceive both of these worlds in equal parts, with the exception being that the deeper you go into the dreaming, the more stark, alien, and detached from the human baseline reality your Faemien becomes. Most of the time, though, the two work in tandem. Which also means that these two aspects of yourself are deeply tied to each other and affect each other. If your mortal seeming is sick, your Faemien will appear rotten and diseased for a time, and if your Faemien is killed, you fall into a coma, actually, that can last quite a while, and if you are not saved, it may cause you to physically die of starvation, hypothermia, being eaten by wild animals, whatever is around. Also, your Faemien will it won't be reborn. It'll just return at some point, and you will no longer be in that coma. Chimerical things, they can be a lot more than objects, may exist as different things on both planes. Now, they can still be versions of the same thing, like, for instance, you could have a simple leather ledger containing numbers in the real world, which chimerically is a snake leather-bound tome embellished with gold and emeralds, in which you write down all the secrets that you know. Or it could be, two different things, like a character that I played had a simple laser pointer, which I wish I had a laser pointer. Chimerically, the point is, it was a hunting bow, right? Made of dark oak with pure ruby sort of like flowing through the wood, and it would shoot ruby-tipped arrows that would just sort of materialize when I would knock a new one. The ledger you could write in the real world, and you could write different things in it on like the chimerical dream layer of the real world. If I used the bow in the dream world, I would be using the laser pointer in the real world, so anything chimerical I hurt in the dreaming, I would not injure in the real world. It's kind of like play pretend. Maybe if I shot it like in the eyes, it will be blinded because it's still a laser pointer. This is provided the thing I'm shooting at has a real world counterpart at all, and not all chimerical objects do. Most of it actually exist only in the dreaming and cannot affect the real world at all. Pretty much all objects from the real world do exist in the dreaming though, which this doesn't necessarily mean that they are chimerical in the sense that they are the same thing, as opposed to a reflection of an identical thing. We've talked about this. Much like the Shadowlands are built of the memories people have of things, the dreaming is built of people's ideas of things. So many objects will actually look like hyper-real versions of themselves without necessarily being dual-natured. In a world governed by banality, first and foremost, most objects people have access to in their daily lives are just they're not that interesting, they don't have that many ideas attached to them. They're just grey, boring, and faded. On like a conceptual layer, they still look somewhat normal. This is like explaining colors to the blind. It is possible to make a new chimeric object if you know how, though sometimes they also just happen. And the way that occurs is by an object being infused with a substance called glamour. Now, glamour is the opposite of banality. It is the stuff of dreams, of hope, imagination. Glamour is both inspiration and the product of inspiration. It is creative force in a very literal sense, creative. Made, immaterial really. It's not something you can touch in the traditional sense in the dreaming. Though you can certainly see it. And when it's condensed into the dross, you can touch it. Changelings need glamour to survive, to work magic, and to stave off the omnipresent force of banality. Too much banality will cause a changeling to become undone, which means that their fairy self essentially dies. Their human self forgets all about magic, and maybe one day they will be reincarnated again. This happens to most changelings, actually. Few make it past 50, so the physical decay of their mortal bodies is not such a major problem in changeling society. Not to mention that time spent in the dreaming slows and even halts aging, so making it even more of an afterthought. Changelings seek to avoid being undone still, of course, because much like chrysalis is the true birth of a changeling, undoing is the true death of a changeling. Reincarnation makes them lose all their memories, so, because they're part human and like to consistently be the same person. I don't know if you can relate to that. This is not a great prospect for most of them. This is also the reason why, though most changelings are ultimately pansexual and gender fluid over a very long timescale, the human side they incarnate with is different each time, after all. They're not necessarily those things within, each individual's life, because they get attached to the human aspect of their identity. Changelings go through 3 distinct life stages: childling, wilder, and grump. And the thing about them is that they do not necessarily happen linearly, or even in that order all of the time. You join the changeling world as a childling, full of wonder and willingness to explore, bursting with inspiration as to what you can do. Like a child. Most childlings are children. I don't know why I said that so aggressively, but it is the case. Eventually you run to the darker aspects of the dreaming and realize the full extent of what it means that the world is being besieged by banality. This makes you want to fight back for the purposes of your own survival, to protect mortals and other changelings, and you turn into a wilder, a rebel, an agent of change. But you're also touched by banality, no longer carrying the easy innocence of a childling. You seek out battle with the forces of oppression, willing to bear the scars. And those scars come, they accrue. In your efforts, you actually get something done to cultivate glamour, to win the war. You expose yourself to banality more and more. And eventually you realize that you cannot change the world on your own. You may never see the fruits of your labor, and you are at your most effective when you work with a sharp mind, not when you're driven by blind and impatient passion. At this stage, you're a grump, tired and laden with banality, but also experienced and often rather powerful. A grump's passion can be reignited, so they may return to being a wilder, or they may discover something that brings that sparkle at the wonder of the world back to their eye, and jump all the way back to childling. A childling, stifled by rejection and abuse, could become so jaded so quickly, they turn directly into a grump, because, they can't find it within themselves to rebel and fight back. Your life stage affects how your Famian looks, which in turn does give you a sort of aura in your mortal seeming. Have you ever seen a child that just looks old? Or like an old man full of vitality and zest? You may have run into a young grump, or an old childling. To avoid their decline into grumpdom, changelings need to cleanse themselves of banality, and also fuel themselves with glamour. This is most easily done in the dreaming, where glamour is abundant, but too much time spent in the dreaming brings with it the risk of bedlam, the insanity of losing yourself entirely to your Fae self and forgetting all about your mortal existence. So ideally, if you're attached to, being, you get most of your glamour in the autumn world. Glamour can be acquired in several different ways. First of all, changelings can harvest glamour in the wild, as it were, through a process called revelry, which may actually sustain them quite well, mainly because, each kith, that's one of the types of changelings, and we're going to talk about all of the various different kiths later, has an inherent ability to harness glamour in a particular setting that reflects their natural dream environment or the type of dreams that they are made of. Because they are part human, they can even grow rather significant amounts of glamour within themselves, a process known as rapture, which is a difficult balancing act of inspiring themselves to create and then harvesting the glamour of their own creations, which need not be a physical thing that they made. It can be like a story, a discovery, a social situation, that kind of thing. Most glamour is harvested through cultivation, though, a practice known as musing or reverie, in which may turn entire places into glamour-infused paradises for creatives. Like, an artist commune, the campus library where you just feel inspired. Changelings get to know humans and encourage them to pursue their passions, be that motivating them to continue producing creative works or pursue some sort of personal life aspiration, like becoming an astronaut. Which may ultimately bring them in touch with the technocracy, which I just had to do this whole spiel to bring it up. Because some of you probably think, yeah, this whole banality thing sounds like what the technocracy is trying to do in the world. This is what they're setting loose. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I have a huge video explaining what the technocracy is in the context of World of Darkness. Yes and no. Sure, the technocracy is trying to build a rationalistic worldview, which is very banal. They want order, process, bureaucracy, control, that kind of stuff. And there's no space for dreams in the technocracy. Except, of course, that the whole idea of the technocracy is a dream, something that many technocrats are inspired to pursue. Scientists, engineers, medical doctors, explorers who pencil in the grey areas on the map can also be sources of glamour for changelings. Many feats of modern technology inspire people, give them hope, make it easier for them to realize all the products of their creativity. A changeling can become fascinated with the number puzzle wonders of accounting and tax evasion, which to most changelings would be a meat grinder of instant undoing because, rare though they are, there are humans who genuinely love doing accounting. So yes, while the technocratic consensus is certainly one that is high in banality, it still does include a good amount of glamour. It's just located in unusual places. You still wouldn't want to meet a technocratic agent as a changeling, because those enlightened scientists are in fact mages, and their active disbelief in anything supernatural makes them into a walking Chernobyl's elephant's foot of banality for changelings, which you're just going to be ripped apart by the sheer reality-rending power that all mages carry with themselves all the time. This does, by the way, also mean that other mages can be fonts of glamour so blinding they send you to immediate bedlam and everything in between. Mages they're special. Another method of acquiring glamour is to just steal it from humans and others, but mainly humans. This is called ravaging, and it's often illegal. Most Fae don't do it. Only the Unseelie think it's an okay practice to engage in at all. But it is very easy. You basically inject a dreamer with banality by causing problems, annoying them, discouraging them from following their dreams, shaking their confidence in their creative work, and, that it pushes glamour out. And you get that. You just eat it. And the dreamer will then be unable to create for a while, but, that's what they're for, isn't it? The fourth and most banned big no-no method of acquiring glamour is called rhapsody, also known as the Path of Destruction, which is ironically the opposite of ravaging because you infuse a mortal with glamour as opposed to banality, overwhelming their creative forces and driving them to create an absolute masterpiece, their magnum opus, something deeply inspired. And then, when that is done, they are completely burned out creatively. They will never be able to create again. Now you might say, well, sure, that's sad, but they made something of immense cultural value. They should be set. Which, first of all, way not to understand artists and other creative people, like, I don't care how much money I have, the loss of my creativity would be a fate worse than death. And that's not an exaggeration. They also rarely really get anything for it because, the farther a work of art travels, the more available it is, the more its glamour is diluted until it's eventually spent. And the best way to limit that is to take that manuscript the artist created and put it into your own private vault, where no one will ever see it. And if you need an immense amount of glamour that's stored inside of it, you just destroy it forever. This act, along with the destruction of an artist's creative spark, ultimately creates permanent banality because whoever did the rhapsodizing got greedy. And, what was produced was of value to no one but that particular changeling. If that's not an analogy for the entertainment industry, and also, climate change, I don't know what is. Okay, but why? Why has banality been increasing? What's the deal with the diminishing glamour? What is Changeling society doing about it? Well, for that, we need to take a dive into the history of changelings and thereby the history of the very dreaming itself. And that history is old. It is oh so very old. Though it is populated by the dreams of humanity, the dreaming is older than humanity. Before humans came along and filled it with lofty intellectual concepts of honor and society, the dreaming was made up of the atavistic phantasms of animals, ruled by constant terror and struggle. The hare keeping her hackles up on the lookout for wolves, the mammoth trotting along its ancestral paths, the bear contemplating the landscape full of prey. It was out of these minds that the Fomorians emerged. We have no idea if they were the first beings possessed of some form of intellect in the dreaming, as maybe long before the dreams of animals, the dreaming may have been governed by the alien dreams of mushrooms, if you will, and who knows what kind of mycelial ruins lie buried beneath the most primordial parts of it. The Fomorians were at first simply implacable titans, abstractions of higher mind imbued with godlike trappings before the concept of gods themselves had even, been come up with. It was only with early pre-humanity that they became more complex. True hierarchs, as the Neanderthals, with our many now extinct cousins and eventually our own ancestors, imagined them. They were creatures of primal fear, and so were their servants, known as the Tharlane. But humanity had lofty dreams, aspirations of civilizations, of safety and comfort, glorious hunts that would feed the tribe for years, berry bushes so loaded they would collapse under their own weights, safe caverns, bountiful harvests, and sunlit days that never end. And as we thought them, these ideas became part of the dreaming, giving birth to the Tuatha De Danann, true gods that defeated the evil Fomorians with the help of other fairy servants born out of the more concrete dreams of humankind, known as the Kiths. And then they imprisoned the Fomorians in the farthest and deepest reaches of the deep dreaming, never to be seen again, wink, wink. But for all their wisdom and magnanimity, the Tuatha De Danann found themselves disappointed in the new dream beings they were shepherding, and also in the humanity that had dreamt them up in the first place. A Redcap slew his brother in a fit of jealousy, and thus were born the vampires. Shape changes did not respect the Tuatha's edict to remain in one form, and thus the werewolves were cast out of the dreaming. The very humanity that had dreamt up the all-powerful Tuatha started comparing itself to them. Their wise and learned folk believed that they could harness the divine powers through a rational understanding of the world, and their very first forging of cold, pure iron was the beginning of the end for the dreaming. Basically, this is when banality started to exist. Humans began to reject the notion that all there was dreams, and the Tuatha De Danann saw this and sort of fucked off. They just sort of left. And, they left behind their fairy children to fend for themselves. This event is known as the Sundering, and it was a very slow, gradual process that lasted a few thousand years of complicated fairy politics back when the courts were still organized after the seasons, which eventually changed after a series of wars that created what we today know as the Seelie and Unseelie Courts, which are defined primarily in how they relate to humanity. And we'll talk about the courts a little bit more later after we're done with the Kiths. At this point, most of the Fae were still exactly that, Fae. Some had begun to study and even subject themselves to the Changeling way because they realized that humanity's connection to the dreaming was fading, but Changelings were really more of a tools than true Fae, go-betweens for the fairy nobility to interact with the most banal of human endeavors, and quite frankly, there was not much more than that kind of niche use for them. That is until the Shattering. Sometime in the Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages, we had a number of catastrophes, like, the Small Ice Age and the Black Plague, as well as a bunch of wars, that really sort of spread the energies of despair among the people and made them lose hope. With the connection of the dreaming having grown weak over the preceding millennia anyway, this, as well as the early age of enlightenment that was in the process of being born, was what infused the world with so much banality that the dreaming finally slipped away for good. It didn't disappear completely, of course, but the gateways to the deep dreaming and the fairy homeland of Arcadia in it were closing rapidly. By and large, the fairy nobility decided that this was their cue to do as the Tuatha De Danann had done, and fucked off to Arcadia in the depths of the deep dreaming. Mostly in a very elbowy way to save themselves from being destroyed by banality, and in this process they actually left behind most of the commoner fae that they had ruled over. And while some of them isolated themselves in their own little pockets of the dreaming, most decided to become changelings, choosing reincarnation with only very spotty recollection of their past lives over certain death. And then, silence. At least this is how I prefer to tell the story. Others would say the Tuatha De Danann appeared of their own accord and gifted humanity the power of dreaming, and that iron is just inherently hateful or jilted in some way, and that the Fomorians orchestrated this fall. It's quite frankly, by far, it's not even the only story that fairy all over the world tell. It's just the origin story that the Western Fae, the Kithane, have passed through the unspoken millennia. The Xian of Eastern China tell the story of the rebellion by the little gods who were meant to answer the prayers of mortals against their duties in the celestial bureaucracy, to the point where the most exalted personage of Jade decided to cast them out and make them forever unable to access the hallowed halls of its palace. In many parts of the countless dream realms of Africa, they have little trouble penetrating to the very depths of the dreaming, so much so that they are spoiled for choice as to, make genuine expeditions difficult again. Sure, the dreaming changed over the centuries, but in the cradle of humanity, it is so utterly ancient and deep and rich that it really makes no difference. Banality didn't touch Australia at all until European explorers landed on its shores, only to find that the local dreaming was so raw and primordial that it was utterly alien even to the Kithane scholars of the way things used to be before the earliest stirrings of the Sundering. The geography of dreams here was different, the laws were different, and their inhabitants, though superficially similar, were different as well. European changelings ended up wielding banality as a weapon against the Dreamtime, to help the dreams of the settlers they came with grow. But even now, large swathes of Australia are enveloped in the rich tapestry of Dreamtime. The dreams of the Native American Nunahi were murdered cast adrift from the Dreeling, if not entirely annihilated, through the genocide of the many different peoples that dreamt them in the first place. Their version of Arcadia, the High Places, is thought to no longer exist at all anywhere in the Deep Dreaming. The fate of the Hawaiian Menehune is similar. Both of these groups exist in parallel societies and often under the yoke of the European system of Fey courts. All of this is to say that we are going to talk about, in this video, one particular very prominent, globally influential incarnation of the Dreaming and its denizens, right? Their story of how it happened, because the Dreaming is infinitely diverse and malleable. Things look very different in many other places across the world and through time. However, pretty much all parts of the Dreaming, all over the world, at least in terms of overlap with the mundane autumn world, were touched in some way by the one event that changed everything. Banality hates him. The event that, for a brief moment, burst the gates of Arcadia wide open as it infused the world with a massive dose of pure glamour. This thing that primarily influenced the Western world, certainly, but everyone was aware of to some extent, and no matter their allegiances and cultures, people around the world were inspired by it. It was, of course, none other than the moon landing. Yes, folks, the moon landing, the one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind moon landing on the actual moon is what revitalized our connection to the Dreaming after centuries of separation and starvation. It's not like it was just this singular event. For over a decade, things had been looking up somewhat. There between, there were always trickles of glamour as regular people dared to dream again. Originally, the Roaring Twenties generated a whole bunch of glamour, for instance, but it was severely tempered by banality still. The moon landing was an event of such immense cultural significance because of the first time since the dawn of humanity, since before we could even conceptualize it was a world, people landed and walked on the moon. One of the most dreamt about objects of mystical significance to every culture. All the civilizations throughout time have looked up at the moon. And especially in the Western world where glamour had become very sparse, this allowed the fairy nobility to return from the depths of Arcadia, riding into the autumn world on glorious steeds. Now, for the most part, they understood that the world was still super high in banality, so they would have to become changelings themselves. But this thought was also very offensive to them because, changelings were the kind of degradation only commoners would have to suffer, not the exalted nobility. But they really felt like they needed to return to the world to assume rulership of the commoners once again. That's the reason why they did it. So no way possibly it could be because they were cast out of Arcadia or whatever. Why would you even bring that up? That's a very specific thing to bring up, and it's definitely isn't what happened. You can't prove it either. So what they did was basically go into the minds of fully formed adult people, erasing their souls and overriding them with themselves. Those people were, after all, only mortal humans, and there would always be more where those had come from. What followed is known as the Resurgence War, because these nobles, they basically showed up and they were like, oh look, the commoners managed to survive. How convenient. Now they can get back to serving us. We'll take back our lands and, we'll take all these lands that the commoners were part of colonizing as well. After all, they did that for us. And you'd think there would be a thank you very much at the end of that sentence, but, there wasn't. It's more of an or else type situation. The problem was that these noble fae were supported by the Dreaming itself, which remembered the old ways, and also they had a bunch of Arcadian magic and fancy artifacts from the Deep Dreaming, which gave them a huge advantage over the commoners, even though they were in the minority. So ultimately, they managed to re-establish the old social contract known as the Eshiat, by which commoner Kithane would serve the children of the Tuatha de Danann in exchange for guarantees of protection and hospitality. This doesn't mean that commoners are back in their old place, though. They have a lot of freedoms and concessions they didn't used to. Many individuals of commoner Kiths were ennobled formally, because yes, all of the nobility was actually just one particular Kith, of Fae, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. Some areas of the world are actually republics ruled by commoners. Not so the High Kingdom of Concordia, though, which is the good old US of A. Very much not one of the ancestral land of Kiths nobility, but a big land rich with glamour and full of commoners they had a preordained right to rule over. One of them was the guy who codified many of these concessions, David Ardry, who is the ruler of Concordia. I don't want to focus too much on Concordia, to be honest, wherein I much differ from the Changeling lore, which is almost entirely about the USA. There's like a lot of stuff there. All the regions have cool names, like the Duchy of Blue Grasses for the Appalachians. That's cool. It's just a lot of info, though. It's not any sort of framework that'll help you understand how it all works. Instead, I want to talk about the dreams of mortals, which didn't stop after the moon landing, right? They only grew bigger and bolder. We had decades of optimism and culture and people having high aspirations, while nothing hit as hard as the moon landings in terms of a single dose of globalized glamour. Billions of smaller glamour sources poured out seemingly every day for the coming decades. This translated into an instant closing in of the autumn world with the dreaming. More trods opened, more dream stuff poured over, more chimera started showing up, more fragments of the near dreaming faded back into existence. Aside from some of the overarching threats, which soon disappeared by themselves, things were finally feeling like they were going to be okay for the ordinary everyday people in the West. Television and the internet made media much more accessible, and thus more and more aspects of the dreaming were discovered by Kiths every day. Truly, it was all dreams until the nightmares returned. Because not all glamour is, of course, the same. All drinks are water, but sometimes that water is coffee, or tea, or Gatorade, or piss, and the same is true of glamour. Nightmares can produce it just as much as dreams can, and much like the moon landing happened for optimism-flavored glamour, there was an event that had a similar impact on the global psyche of the dreamers, which opened the doors to those parts of the dreaming the Fomorians and their servants had been banished to. Can you guess what it is? It's so funny. It's 9/11. You wish I was joking, but I am not. I truly am not. 9/11 is what caused the phenomenon known as the Evanescence. And much like the moon landing, it was also preceded and followed by many more trickles of nightmarish glamour. If you think about it, 9/11 was just the main gong of a series of events that brought about the fundamental changes in the mentality of the West that define much of how we think today. Namely, a mentality of constantly being afraid. Seriously, have you seen the TikToks of middle-class women driving cars that could crush a World War II era tank, saying you need to floor it and drive back to your castle when someone forgets their water bottle on the hood of their vehicle? They're banning teenagers from being in shopping malls in places where a milkshake costs half my rent because they're afraid of human trafficking and terrorism. All of that shit follows in a very easy and clear causal chain from 9/11, right? It was the beginning of a new fear-mongering era, and quite frankly, with how neurotically terrified of everything everyone is all of the time, it has worked. That's a real thing that's really happening, and thus, of course, has an effect on the dreaming in this alternate reality where everything is the same, plus fairies. So that should be enough about the history of fairykind to give you a pretty good understanding of why we are here today. But what about the actual people? What are changelings like? What are the different kinds of changelings, and what can they do? Well, the answer to this is a lot to all of those questions. It's a lot. There are potentially as many different kinds of changelings as there are sapient beings that humanity's imagination spawned in the dreaming, which That's a whole fucking lot. Everything from like major cross-cultural phenomena to whatever local legend you have in your particular town, they're all in there, and fundamentally, they're all fae. They do, however, have almost entirely arbitrary, culturally defined, distinct categories within them, bearing in mind that arbitrary and culturally defined distinctions are actually kind of a big deal in the Dreaming. From the perspective of Western changelings, there's the Kiths, which are the Western changelings, comprising their numerous Kiths, the 12 most common of which we'll discuss in a minute. The Tharlane, the Unseelie Fomorian nightmare fae that are closely related to the Kiths, and the Garlane, which is literally just everyone else, from the Inanime, which are nature fae, to the Nunnehi of North America, the Hessian of China, and the spirit beings of Australia. As for the Kiths, they each represent a particular kind of dream being that has access to certain types of powers known as birthrights, and is afflicted with a particular frailty. They also each have a way of harvesting glamour that is unique to their Kith, as well as a particular flavor to their magic that most of the time really just boils down to the characteristics of the individual in question, what tropes are associated with their personality. Orcathane also have a more sinister Tharlane counterpart, of which they are the lighter version. At least this is true about like the 12 main ones. Smaller Kiths and whatever Kiths you can come up with, which yes, the core rulebook has extensive rules, a huge guide on coming up with your own Kiths that I find it's really intuitive and easy. You can do stuff based on more regional legends or really whatever you can dream of. Sometimes those might not have Tharlane counterparts, especially if they're young, only recently appeared, given that Tharlane are often, but not always, pretty primordial, if you will. Boggans are household spirits. They're the little people that come out from underneath the floorboards to clean your house when you're asleep. The trusty innkeepers making a hearty stew for the weary traveller. The homesteaders keeping small havens in the most unexpected yet convenient places in ship shape against the cold winds of winter. They're also terrible gossips. Nothing escapes their ears, and everything is shared among their peers. Usually they do this, to keep a community together, air out the dirty laundry, but it doesn't always work out that way. Nevertheless, every freehold wants a Boggan in charge of keeping things organized. They are the hosts, though maybe not so much the entertainers of Kithane society, and they love keeping everything well organized and running smoothly so everyone else can enjoy the comforts they provide. They enjoy freeing people of their most tedious burdens, whether that be housework, homework, really all manner of uninspiring work. God, I wish I had a Boggan here. And they gain glamour from doing these things for other people, which, yes please, take my fucking glamour. Their birthrights are craft work, which allows Boggans to do all manner of labor, especially chores, in 1/3 of the time and without issues, so long as nobody's looking. And social dynamics, an instinctive sense of how people they are observing relate to one another, even if they've only just met. The Boggan frailty is called Call of the Needy, which compels them to always help people in need, the only exception being their most hated enemies. As mortals, Boggans tend to be short and round, with calloused yet dexterous hands that have seen more than a few days of honest hard work. In their Famian, on the other hand, the main thing that changes is that they have pointy ears. Yeah, it's not that much. And also, like, their eyebrows, they get, like, big, bushy and large, comically so, even. Their Tharlane equivalent is the Boggart, a conniving and greedy creature that is just as industrious as they are, but in order to obtain power over others, mainly mortals, and sabotage their plans by being unreasonable and cruel. They're your boss, basically. Boggarts often do dirty and obscene work that nobody wants to do, not even Boggans, but not because it's tedious, but because it's immoral shit, like disposing of dead bodies. They love being the manager that orders employees around, and they're quite fond of working with others of their kind to maximize their opportunities for being horrible. A classic Seelie Boggan is that rotund, talkative friend who is always quick with kind words and excellent advice, and who loves inviting people into his home to cook fantastic and nourishing meals for them, in evenings brimming with companionship and celebration. And if you call them up, in the middle of the night because you're stuck in the rain 2 cities over, they'll hop in their car and drive over to you. They will save your ass. The rare Unseelie Boggan is the aforementioned personage engrossed by and fascinated with the usually quite banality-laden work of accounting, which allows them to manage vast assets and get paid good money to help rich people do tax evasion, which they know every exception and loophole for. Jimmy Carl, I mean, they have insight into many secrets and love stirring up drama just so they can create a little bit of chaos that will shake things up. These are, of course, just examples. There's a huge variety of Boggans, both overall and within the context of either court, as there is of every Kith, so, don't take these as gospel. Clurichauns are natural rabble-rousers who love nothing more than 2 things: a good fight and a good story resulting from that fight. And their collections, the third thing is they love I know I said 2, but it's 3. They're the icebreakers and the merrymakers of Kithane society, born from dreams of levity and passion where you can just let out and let loose, and all the consequences of that are suspended in an environment of trust and forgiveness. It basically, when you and your friends beat the shit out of each other, you do it for fun, and it only reinforces the friendship. This is what Clurichauns do. They thrive in chaos because it can diffuse and mellow out even the most tense situation. They don't run the pub, but they are there so often they might as well be part of the staff, always quick to pour you another drink. Often their role is that of the musician. Whether paid as an official act or not, they'll do it anyway. As friends and allies, they are fiercely loyal, and they will not shy away from a tussle. But more often than that, you'll find that for them, it's about clearing the air. And after that nose is bloodied, you'll be drinking with the folks that just an hour ago were your enemies. This gives Clurichaun's glamour, as do conversations with people passionate about collecting things. Because I don't know if I've mentioned this, but they like collecting things. Their birthrights are twinkling of an eye, which allows them to disappear and pop back up with an almost teleportation-esque quality. Even if you're holding them down in a physical bind, they can plop, just slip away and be somewhere else. There's also fighting words with which they can provoke people into throwing punches with supernatural compulsion. They'll be careful to make sure people do this only far away from their pot of gold, though. Because their frailty horde has each of them obsessed with a certain type of collection, whether it be stamps, beer bottles from defunct brands, or Magic the Gathering cards that they need to maintain and spend time around. As mortals, Clurichauns are often short and muscular, with hard fists and broad shoulders that make them powerhouses in any physical confrontation. Many of them also look Irish, with the red hair and everything, though there are many Clurichauns that only look that way in their fey mien. Also, every Clurichaun has scars, because that's just what happens when you lead that kind of life. The Tharlane equivalent of the Clurichaun is the Bodak, where the Clurichaun, they represent the ease and revelry for adults. The Bodak instead embodies all of the most fearful and terrible moments of a child. They're the monster in the closet, hiding in the cracks when your parents are looking with the horrible and mean visages. They love to feed off fear and how it makes the imagination run wild, and we'll learn a great deal about what terrifies people in order to scare them. A classic Seelie Clurichaun is the folk musician with the guitar that has the "This Machine Kills Fascists" sticker on it, playing all the tunes that make people happy and that get them excited for some real action, by which I mean, punching people in the face. They're found in all manner of venues, from parks to pubs, and they keep a vast collection of vinyl records in their home that they enjoy on quiet weeknights with a glass of whiskey. A more unseelie example is that almost vagabond type of alcoholic rabble-rouser that gets banned from every bar because whenever they show up, eventually someone starts throwing chairs. So they need to keep moving from small town to small town, which can be difficult because all those unassembled model ferry kits they have, they take up quite a few suitcases at this point, and they're becoming increasingly difficult for every new motel to accommodate. Eshu are nomadic storytellers who exalt the experience of the many people in and out of whose lives they walk at just the right time. They are purveyors and crafters of myths and legends, as fascinated by creating them as they are by enjoying the creations of others and carrying within themselves the oral traditions of long-lost peoples and civilizations, as well as the shaggy dog story about old Granny Maeve from down the road, and also the aristocrats. For all the stories they like to tell about others, the Eshu prefer to shroud themselves in mystery. They're not the protagonists of their stories, they're the bards that retell them. And the less the people they talk to know about them, the less they're going to alter the pure essence of the story they tell. Of all the Kiths, the Eshu are the most widespread, and though they have their strongest roots in West Africa, you can find them literally anywhere in the world. Among the griots, which are African storytelling artists that sort of travel around, many know of and appreciate the Eshu that walk among the ranks of their profession, and the Eshu themselves gain glamour from listening to a story told by someone who knows what they're doing, because storytelling is an art. Because they don't like being rooted down and live entirely on the road, Eshu are considered good emissaries, though it happens that they probably will get sidetracked by some important event that just so happens along their path. Their birthrights are serendipity, which ensures they are often in the right place at the right time to kick off or otherwise be part of something interesting, whether it be the next chapter in their own story or just a rare and unusual happenstance of significance. So they will never get lost because they'll always end up where they want to go. And talecraft, which allows them to grow from the stories they experience as they reflect upon and understand the nature of their adventures in their retellings of them. Their frailty, recklessness, reflects this the other way around, as they will find themselves compelled to do dangerous shit if there is a chance of something interesting happening because of it. So they have a lot of mistakes that they make that they can then reflect on. As mortals, Eshu can have literally any appearance, though it is not uncommon for them to have like African or Middle Eastern features, regardless of who their biological parents are. These features tend to be exaggerated in their femien, where they tend to also become more tall and graceful, with long legs to do long strides. You can't see my legs on this, but I have them, I promise. Their voile, chimerical clothes tend to change to suit the environment that they're in automatically. The Tharlane equivalent to the Eshu are the Aithu, who, unlike the Eshu, whom you really want to meet as strangers on the road, are traveling waylayers and bandits. They can cloak their desperate aura and emaciated appearance to seem like someone entirely innocuous, who, they may just need help by the side of the road, and who would you be not to help them? Only to use their stories, often tales of woe, to lull their victims into an almost trance-like state of obsessive listening while their associates sneak up to clobber them over the head and steal their stuff. A classic Seelie issue might be a freelance trucker who not only absorbs the road stories of their colleagues, but always clogs up the radio by telling or listening to the tales of other truckers. The wares they transport are often interesting, and thanks to their powers, usually on time. A rather uncommon example of an Unseelie issue might be an activist that travels from city to city to poke their nose into whatever the social issues of the day are, only to provoke escalation, because that will produce the most interesting stories even if people get hurt in the process. Knockers are makers of the absolute finest but frustratingly never perfect stuff. They're the artisans, engineers, and to a certain extent, scientists of the Changeling world, always engrossed with some sort of complicated technical problem, often one of their own devising, that they're trying to fix. This is usually something practical, like when they're trying to construct a fully automated waffle-making machine, or it may be abstract things like trying to fix all the plot holes in a story that they're writing. Even the non-grumps among them have a grumpy reputation, and they swear like fucking sailors over the slightest fucking mishaps. All this anger might make you think that knockers hate what they do, but they are in fact like born of the dreams of flow state, of concentration and passion in the pursuit of difficult things you're willing to suffer for. And that suffering you're gonna have to vent about if you want to keep pursuing the thing. Knockers gain glamour from fixing broken things and devising solutions to novel problems, even and often especially when this is done to take that burden off someone else's shoulders or to spark their creative process. The glamour harvesting happens in the autumn world, but knockers naturally tend to be the best at crafting chimerical materials as well, for all the wild and crazy properties that stuff has. Their birthrights are make it work, which allows them to MacGyver chimerical items from things that are vaguely related to the purpose they're trying to accomplish, with the conceit that those items will not have too many uses in them. And fix it, which allows them to repair almost anything by swearing and performing percussive maintenance on it. Their frailty is called perfect is the enemy of the done, which dictates that, improbably skilled though they may be, nothing they ever put together will be entirely flawless, and it will sometimes, not often, but sometimes, come undone at the most inopportune moment. As mortals, knockers are often spindly and have ruddy or pallid skin, as well as an aura of always being in a bad mood, which is probably because they are. In their Famian, they have Snow White Dragon Ball style hair that sticks up like this, and their, sharp-featured, not particularly expressive faces. Their ears are pointed, as are their teeth, so it's probably a good thing that they don't smile a lot. The Tharlane equivalent of knockers are goblins, who share their creative talents, but put them to, shall we say, different use, as they much prefer building improbable machines designed for extremely dangerous pranks. They're not really pranks. They're often thought of as gremlins because they sabotage things, but the truth is that their sabotage is actually an adjustment to make the machine fit with the vision of chaos that they're trying to engineer. So from a goblin's perspective, fixing something to do a thing other than create mayhem is the real sabotage. A Seelie Nocker may be a town's mad scientist-type inventor, always going around offering to upgrade and fix everyone's hoovers and grills. If something breaks anywhere in the town, you can be sure that the Nocker will already be there, itching to put it back together. You can hear them curse in their workshops late at night as their inventions spark, unwind, or otherwise fly apart. The roughly equally as common Unseelie Knocker is a relentless innovator who never asks if they should and always assumes that they probably can, provided they spend enough time hammering out the details. They will often seek a number of human assistants to cultivate them and then burn them out as they drive them hard to sort of rip the glamour from them, leading to just an obscenely high turnover rate of people who will need some time if they want to get back into the engineering business. Piskeys are the light-hearted, fleet-footed messengers of Kithane society. Social chameleons always on the move and always elusive to all those who wish to catch them. They're born of the childlike dreams of growing up, finding an identity, as well as always having a friend that is whoever you need them to be in any given situation, which is why Piskeys are inconsistent, to put it mildly. Basically, they adopt personalities like outfits, and these are people who change their style often, just so they can try out being someone new. They don't forget who they were or lose their allegiances necessarily. They're just not attached to their identities in the way most people are. Their sense of self isn't a void, though. It's more like a lump of Play-Doh. They're not quite as nomadic as the Eshu, and they will settle into certain communities for a while, although of course those communities may be in and of themselves nomadic. They will learn all there is to learn and understand about whatever subculture they've joined, be it punks, the local Chicanos, even cults. They join cults sometimes just to see what happens, and gain glamour from witnessing important events and rites of passage within whatever community they find themselves embedded in. They love plenty of stuff outside their particular community too, so much so that they will often take that stuff with them. Their birthrights are nimble, which it's exactly what it says on the tin. They're hypermobile, super agile, uncannily dexterous, and blending in, which is it's also what it says on the tin, as all the features of their mortal seeming will appear like they belong, from accent to mannerisms to clothing to skin color. This is not real, it's an illusion, but humans can't tell the difference. Their frailty, light fingers, plays well with both of these things because they often find themselves compelled to steal certain items that are of significance to people, even if the Piskey themselves have no way of knowing that that particular item is that valuable to that person. As mortals, as per their birthright, they look like whatever they need to look like. But as fairies, they're quite recognizable, being lithe, slender, and possessed of radiant, silvery blonde hair, the opposite of this. Their eyes, which can be of any color, almost seem to glow a little bit, and only the muscles you need to smile make up their facial features. The Tharlane equivalent to Piskeys are Spriggans, where Piskeys represents a child's dreams of all the potential selves they could be. Spriggans are an adult's nightmare of having that choice taken away from that child by a significant trauma coming into their lives. Spriggans are cruel. They're just cruel, and they love making people, especially children, afraid to be themselves, and they'll kidnap them. That's the kidnappy type of fairy. The official law here says that they don't really harm them otherwise, aside from the trauma of kidnapping them, but with everything else it says about the Spriggans, it seems to me, personally, that maybe there's just certain topics they didn't necessarily want to bring into the fairy game explicitly, and I think that's fair enough, really. A Seelie Piskey might be an itinerant ambassador to and from various subcultures. The local court's expert, if you will, on like a particular group of people. They truly understand what it means to be one of them, so they can help other changelings cultivate their glamour and stoke their dreams. A much more common than you think type of Unseelie Piskey is an accomplished burglar of the elaborate heist variety, able to enlist mortal aid and engage in espionage to get their hands on information they can sell for a very high price indeed. They will still maintain their sheen of innocence, and to them it truly is about the experience, but blending into certain dark subcultures requires you to embrace your own darkness sometimes. Pooka are lying liars and pranking pranksters. But they're neither of these things for, like, evil reasons. They do it to shake things up and expose hypocrisy wherever it can be found, which, you know, in the dredge of banality and the pomp of fairy courts is pretty much everywhere. They are deeply connected to the natural world and not too fond of obligations beyond what is truly necessary for survival, sometimes not even that, and they really sprang from humanity's dreams to truly understand animals and how they work, which eventually combined with the envy that many of us, most of us, maybe all of us, have of cats, that they can just, you know, they lounge around all day. Pookas represent a simpler life that many yearn for, which is our, you know, in our current world, that's difficult to have. Tearing apart the oppressive structures of obligation through mischief and trickery is a Pooka's major source of glamour. Their favorite targets for pranks are arrogant and mean-spirited people, though, of course, you know, that's what they want you to believe. When you get down to it, most Fae are not particularly fond of the Pooka, shall we say. They don't like him. They just keep him around because, you know, they're there, and they always have been, and sometimes they can be useful. Their birthrights are shape-changing, which allows them to change into their animal form, which is, you know, they all have one, and it can be anything real. It has to be real, like a cat, a chicken, or a narwhal. It can't be like a dragon or a phoenix. And confidant, which is their incredible ability to pull old secrets and shames out of anyone they talk to. Even if it's people that they've just met, you will just entrust them with all your dirtiest laundry. Their frailty is untruths, which means that they can never truly speak the literal truth. If they want to give accurate information, a little embellishment should suffice, but no Pooka can ever give a straight answer. In their mortal form, Pooka often dress in ways that are rather eccentric and will remind people through mannerisms and appearance of the animal that they can change into. This is all exaggerated in their Famien, where a reindeer Pooka might have antlers and you know, those large weird morphing eyes. They're fascinating, but you should look out like reindeer eyes. It's tremendous. Or a parakeet Pooka might have outrageous green hair and a shrill voice. The Tharlane equivalent to the Pooka are the beasties. And there's something unique about them in that rumor has it that Pookas can actually become beasties over the course of their existence, and also, beasties can become Pookas, though this kind of thing only happens extremely rarely. Their appearances are always monstrous, not real, and they are such a crime against the natural order that most people will forget all the details of encountering them in their creature form at all. A Seelie Pooka is a house cat, a stand-up comedian, a fun poker whose jokes are often inappropriate and make people think of things in ways they're not supposed to. They especially love powerful people to jab at, but occasionally, the underprivileged are too full of themselves as well, and that needs to be corrected if the Pooka feels like it. A more common Unseelie Pooka is a vicious hound that likes to maul anyone who messes with their freedom, frequently crossing the line when it comes to sabotaging the lives of their enemies, always playing pranks that really are not pranks by any stretch of the imagination. Anyone who slights them is going to get their tires slashed if they're lucky, especially if they're the approved enemy of some sort of environmentalist group. Redcaps are creatures of major hunger. Not just bruisers, but killers. Not just warriors, but berserkers. Bandits and raiders that are most formidable and highly dangerous. Not simply because of their prowess, but also because they do not like to be controlled. They are independent mercenaries that value their freedom, not simply a sworn fighting force, and they like to team up primarily with their own kind too, which means that soon you will have a whole squad that you need to control, or they will start pillaging around the freehold. Very obviously, they sprang from human fears and nightmares of, things with big mouths that will eat you. But also, they have an element of humanity's own dreams of unrestricted gluttony. They love pushing boundaries and being as disgusting as possible in an effort to gross out everyone around them, especially those fancy Feylords and ladies. They're the kid who would eat poop, if you dare them, but taken to the extreme. And among changelings in general, they represent a very dark desire for unfettered brutality that is much more at home with the Fomorians than the Tuatha de Danann. But they're probably not descended from them, at least not entirely. They just have those sort of primal associations that make them look like Fomorians. Their birthrights are dark appetite, which gives them the ability to devour literally anything. And I mean anything, literally. It could be a filet mignon, they could eat uranium cake. And rather crucially, your fucking face as well. I've seen a redcap eat a whole ass mountain lion in one bite. And it can happen to you. The other birthright is Bully Browbeat, which gives them an additional aura of terror that allows them to scare anyone and anything. Their frailty is Bad Attitude, which actually refers to the attitude of everyone else who will never give redcaps the benefit of the doubt. They always assume that they have the worst possible intentions. As mortals, redcaps tend to be of solid build and have the crooked teeth and those perpetually bloodshot eyes that make them look like they've been up doing meth for a whole week. Their Famian is that, but dominated by just a huge mouth, a veritable maw of jagged teeth that makes up the entire lower half of their face and is equipped with the right chewing instruments to break down all those lampposts and cutlery they like to chow down on. The Tharlane equivalent to the redcaps, and yes, there is one, are the ghasts, which unlike their rowdy cousins are cold, calm, and calculating. They love their plans and schemes, which are usually very well thought out and operate with great precision. Operate in the medical sense, that is, because they eat organs. They're quite picky about that. They need them, actually. And thus they make up the majority of organ thieves. The stories where people wake up in an ice-filled bathtub, that's them. Because those things are actually rather more modern fears compared to the primordial terror of big mouth E.T. monster, rumor has it that the ghasts are actually a Kith of Tharlane that is younger, not older, than their Kithane equivalent. Also, it is my strong and unironic headcanon that Hannibal Lecter, from the TV show, not the films, is a ghast who cultivates glamour by turning people into serial killers and also serial killing himself. The very rare indeed Seelie Redcap is probably still a troublemaker of some kind, a crusader that is taking up the mantle of some sort of underprivileged group and is pursuing those efforts with less than house-trained tactics, as is sometimes necessary. They're probably part of some sort of hit squad, and their loyalty to their ruler is contingent upon that ruler's support for their particular cause. The significant majority, Unseelie Redcap, might be a gangster, perhaps even like a high-ranking kingpin variety type gangster, given how useful being scary can be at helping you climb that sort of hierarchy. That's just how mafia works. But if so, then certainly one that likes to come and send the message with the rank and file every once in a while. Satyrs are beings of pure passion and revelry. They're the party planners and entertainers of the fairy world. Experts on pleasure in all its countless forms, be it sensual, musical, culinary, comedic, it doesn't matter. Satyrs will show even the most shut-in fun hater a good time. In fact, some of them specialize in drawing enjoyment out of the Squidwards of the world. They maintain sprawling social networks full of fascinating people that make any gathering interesting, and have a great intuition for bringing the right people under the same roof at the same time. Of course, perhaps the main thing satyrs are known for is being, both in a literal and metaphorical sense, horny as fuck. And they do love with a passion and intimacy not found in any other kith. But their true favorite source of glamour is the enjoyment that other people derive from the activity itself, so it need not be sex. It could be pretty much anything. Some satyrs are actually rather irritated at the fact that they're so often reduced to their wild and exuberant sexuality when there's so much more about them that could be enjoyed. Usually, they're complaining about this while they're fucking. The birthrights are Gift of Pan, which allows them to remove other people's inhibitions when it comes to indulging in whatever it is they would, often subconsciously, like to indulge in. This doesn't give them the ability to make them do things those people wouldn't want to do. And physical prowess, which accounts for their nigh inexhaustible reserves of stamina. The according frailty is passion's curse, which makes them susceptible to their own emotions. Really, they're completely gripped by every passing mood. It's all huge and massive, which, often that can be very inappropriate, if not outright dangerous. Though their mortal form may merely be exceptionally hairy, many of them, they're actually, they're very good looking as well, but their attractiveness usually comes from within, right? They're artistic, creative, insightful, often very intellectual, which many people, they find that pretty fucking hot. Their Famian gives them goat legs and goat horns, sometimes also other distinctly goat characteristics. The Tharlane equivalent to satyrs are simply called nasties, which naturally represent the darker aspects of partying. Unlike satyrs, they do not care for safety and enjoyment and consent, just the loss of control that comes with indulgence, and are thus catalysts for addiction and self-destruction. They have terrible hygiene, carry all manner of venereal diseases, and give the very act of revelry a bad name, which is why the satyrs hate them so much. A classic Seelie satyr is that rotund, talkative friend who is always quick with kind words and excellent advice, and who loves inviting people into his home to cook fantastic and nourishing meals for them, in evenings brimming with companionship and celebration. They also play 100 instruments and are most knowledgeable in carnal matters, and yes, that is the exact text that I had, almost the exact text I had for the Seelie Boggan also, which doesn't mean that these two kiths are particularly similar. They're not. They're quite different. But it does speak to the fact that very similar seeming mortals can actually be a very different kiths. A still very common Unseelie satyr is not, in fact, just someone with a BDSM basement. They do tend to prefer the more deviant passions because those are more transgressive, but that is not what defines them. What they will do is blast right past your safe word because they reckon you will experience more pleasure this way, which often leaves people quite traumatized. For them, limits and inhibitions are the same. Selkies are the cause for much heartache in Kithane society. They are one of several maritime kiths that exist, and among those, simply the one that's most integrated into the courts, as they shift between their human and seal form, often acting as emissaries between the overwater and undersea fae communities. Always caught between two distinct aspects of themselves, Selkies can go from extreme extrovert to extreme introvert in a moment, just like this, and often feel like whatever world they're currently a part of, the land or the sea, they should really be enjoying themselves in the other. These moods can hit suddenly, right? So after a week of deep passion spent with a partner on land, there's always the risk that out of nowhere, the Selkie will just decide it's time to return to the water in the middle of the night. You'll get a note, probably, maybe, you will, but who knows when they will return? It doesn't say that in the note. The idea that Selkies' one true love is the sea is a notion born in the wistful and often jealous minds of land-based lovers. It is one of their loves, certainly, and they derive glamour from toiling in the waves just as much as they gain it from toiling in the sheets. We just don't see them missing the land when they're out at sea, so that's how the impression of that being the main passion that they have comes from. One of their standout characteristics is the nature of their chrysalis. Selkies are not born, but chosen by other Selkies. Their fairy souls are bound up in their chimerical sealskin coats, which upon being undone, they pass on to a new person, so they may be Selkie instead. Their birthrights are seal form, which allows them to transform into a sea lion, though other marine mammals are possible, if extremely rare. In their seal form, their abilities are still comparatively superhuman, or super seal-un, because they have ocean's grace, which gives them excellent agility and swimming prowess, even in their human form. Their frailty is their seal coat, which usually appears as something comparable, but not always made of sealskin, and which can change across generations even. If the coat is destroyed, so is the Selkie's immortal fairy soul, so it's a good thing that those coats are highly resilient and self-repairing. I mean, they are, after all, in a sense, alive. As mortal humans, they're often quite athletic because, they're swimmers, but they also have that, Lorelei-like otherworldly beauty about them, the not quite of this earth mysticism in their bottomless eyes. Their face seeming augments this and also gives them smooth skin and webbed fingers. The Tharlane equivalent to Selkies are Kelpies, which, in contrast to the idea of the mysterious and wondrous depth beneath the surface that made of the nightmares of death being under the surface. It's kind of thalassophobia, because water is very good at killing people. They transform into horses. Not sure why, but horses are actually quite good at swimming. People are surprised by this. And they prefer freshwater, but they do still have the same, allure as Selkies do, making them very dangerous and giving them a reputation that often brushes off on the Selkies, which are, of course, those Selkies are not particularly fond of that. A Seelie Selkie might be a big city surfer that makes a living as a swimming instructor, spending most of their days in the water and most of their nights out with friends on the town, though never too far from the beach. Unseelie Selkies might prefer smaller circles and even prolonged periods of solitude, and might thus be an Arctic explorer, because they don't want to have anything to do with those damn tourists that swim in all the... Imagine people swimming in the water for fun. The water's cold and harsh, and that is beautiful to them. So if you're too weak to handle it, you can fuck right off. The Sidhe are the noble kith. They are the fairy lords and ladies, the shining hosts that return to Arcadia to reclaim their birthright of feudal power. I mean, most of them did, at least. We're going to talk about the courts after this, and all kiths participate in the courts. The Sidhe, however, are 95% of the noble lords and ladies, and whatever the gender-neutral term for that shit is. And technically, the Sidhe are two kiths. There's the Arcadian Sidhe, who returned after the moon landing and in various waves after that, whenever gateways to the Autumn world opened from Arcadia, and there's the Autumnshee, who decided to stay behind during the Shattering in the first place. The former tend to be privy to more ancient secrets, while the latter tend to be more knowledgeable about the Autumn world and more popular with the commoners because they stuck it out instead of running away. These Kiths have mutated into having minor differences, but differences nonetheless, such as the way they practice revelry. Arcadianshee gain glamour when they are revered and adored for their exceptional qualities, especially at court or when they're in charge of something, while Autumnshee gain glamour from wise leaders who try to find innovative solutions for complex problems instead of just putting on the, it's always worked this way before, especially if the thing didn't always work that way before, as is so often the case. Both are leaders, different types of leaders certainly. The Arcadians value the symbolic and exalted nature of royalty, while the Autumns focus on the practical decision-making aspects of it all. Their birthrights are unearthly beauty, which makes them absolutely beautiful in every aspect of their appearance, to a point where, especially in their Famian, it's often intimidating even for the Unseelie ones in particular. And noble bearing, which gives them an inexorable aura of dignity. They can never embarrass themselves. Circumstances will conspire in their favor to prevent it. Their frailties are once again different. Arcadians carrying the curse of banality, which causes them to be affected much more heavily by banality simply because they're entirely unprepared to deal with it, while for the Autumnshee, it's adoration, a tendency to pick up persistent stalkers, which can over time become quite nasty and resentful. If you've ever had a stalker, you know what I'm talking about. As mortals, she are, of course, the peak of beauty. They all look like Hollywood actors. The ugliest among them is still a solid 8. You know how when you have an ugly character in a movie or a TV show, and they're still good looking somehow, but everyone's like, oh, they're ugly. Arcadians tend more toward the supermodel end of the spectrum, whereas the Autumns are more like the Benedict Cumberbatch variety of, he looks extremely weird, but damn if he isn't attractive. Not too much changes in their Famian, except that they look more like elves. That's really it. Arcadians will often have unnatural features here that represent the higher elements of nobility, like sparkling opal eyes and golden filigree in their hair, while for the Autumns, this appearance will be more earthy, like hovering freckles or a blood-red streak in their hair. The Thalian equivalent to the Shee are the Sevatal, equally as charismatic, if not more so, but fundamentally sociopaths, incapable of viewing anyone's existence but their own as meaningful or worth preserving. They use people to get what they want, and their inherent powers help them draw them in and wear down their mental defenses and sense of self, so they eventually become no more than a puppet for the Sevatal's will. They actually are a bit strange because they're not continually reincarnated, but can detect changelings before they have undergone chrysalis and force them to become Sevatal by triggering the process early, and there it doesn't matter what kith they would usually be. A classic Seelie Shee is the good monarch, a ruler who certainly stands above the commoners, they are the master of them, but who takes their responsibility to those commoners as their highest duty, working tirelessly to protect them, help them grow, and contribute to the health of the realm in the interest of all who live there. The just as common Unseelie Shee, is much more power-hungry, probably devoted to some sort of political agenda that isn't serving the common folk, but an abstract ideal. For them, ruling is a right and a tool that they have that is a means to an end to achieve this greater goal. In the modern day, that usually is restoring the balance between the Seelie and Unseelie courts, which, again, we'll talk about later. This doesn't mean that they will disregard those sworn to their service, but their approach to meritocracy will certainly be a good touch more Darwinian.
The Sluagh are hidden in the dark corners of lonely places. They're the cool breath on your neck as you find yourself in an abandoned place at night. The skittering feeling on your arm that you feel even though nothing is really there.
Yeah, they're spooky as hell. They're creepy. And not in the, oh no, this is a terrible monster type of way, but in the dramatic, uncanny, how the fuck is it moving like that type of way. They're usually, though certainly not always, solitary and like to live in dark, isolated places. Really any place most people would find uncomfortable or even disgusting. In fact, they can get a kick out of others' discomfort, especially if it teaches them a lesson. Tales of monsters in the dark, but understood as allies by the adults who told them to their children to ensure they didn't do too much dangerous shit at night, is how the Sluagh were born. Their passion is the search for secrets and the unraveling of mysteries. They love exploring abandoned and liminal spaces, collecting fragments of forbidden lore, or just sort of spelunking in a structure others would stay away from. Of all the Kiths, they are the most knowledgeable about other types of supernatural creatures, especially vampires, as they share spaces and pastimes with the Nosferatu in particular. The two groups even occupy like similar niches in their respective societies, so given how secretive they are with outsiders who can't understand them, I could very well imagine that there would be like a major trade in secrets between Sluagh and Nosferatu pretty much everywhere. Their birthrights are squirm, which give them the truly unnatural powers of contortion with which they can escape almost any confinement, like they're a fucking octopus, and sharpened senses, which is, you know, what it obviously means, plus the ability to see hidden things like magic and ghosts, and presumably a lot of the time Nosferatu using obfuscate. Their frailty is the curse of silence, which makes it impossible for them to do anything more than whisper, which makes calling for help difficult, but it also, you know, just any interaction with them, it feels a bit weird, like this, you know, something like a cold shower on your back. As mortals, Sluagh have pallid skin and strange proportions, moving in their uncanny way just up until the point where it's weird, but not obviously supernatural. They tend to have rings under their eyes and somehow always smell a little moldy. Their Femian accentuates this rather heavily. All their movements are boneless and stuttering, their mouth has no teeth, their noses are just two little holes without, you know, like Voldemort, and their eyes, coming in many different varieties, are never even remotely human. The Tharlane equivalent to the Sluagh are the bogies, and you'd think they just are the monsters in the night, but they're actually rather more akin to like the real monsters that adults know exist, and the stereotypes they associate with them. Bogies are creepy and slovenly, with deformed bodies and just cursed with the pedophile aura. I don't know how else to describe it. They drink various kinds of bodily fluids, blood being the most palatable among those, and they love slinking around in the dark to stalk, terrorize, and ultimately kill their victims. And they're good at it. They're often hired as assassins, but only when it's really necessary, because nobody really wants to be the person who hired a bogey to do anything, really. Even if you can pay them in piss. An uncommon Seelie Sluagh may be a librarian lawkeeper for some sort of noble house, left alone most of the time and consulted on matters of the arcane, potentially doing very niche but nonetheless interesting legitimate historical research, fossicking through ancient documentation in the city archives, and attending faculty parties of the local university's historical society. The more common Unseelie Sluagh would dwell in their particular corner of the sewers, perhaps working as a jewel thief, so whatever hidden apartment they have might be comparatively luxurious, and they'd get contracted to do burglary-related espionage for, you know, whatever house is paying them, which may sometimes even be Seelie houses. And they do this probably in hopes of becoming an actual spy master who has some sort of power, and it moves the actual spies around the web. Trolls are mighty, honorable warriors with impeccable loyalty. They have the strength of tanks, sometimes concentrated into like a smaller frame, but enormous power nonetheless. They are born out of stories of pure knights, superhuman soldiers so bound by their oaths that they will physically collapse if they do not uphold them, and dauntless in the face of even the most unspeakable horrors. It is perhaps because of this, I would assume, and because they come from the cold northern short stories of like Scandinavia, that there is nonetheless a monstrous aspect to them. Though they may inspire a chivalric ideal, they look fierce and dangerous, much like a big scary dog, terrifying foes and reassuring allies. In fact, many suspect that the modern paladin-like troll didn't emerge until the Middle Ages. Trolls derive much of their glamour from protecting and caring for those they're sworn to protect, even if it's not people, but like a building, clearing away the leaves around it or doing some repairs on the roof may be very satisfying to trolls. And then of course there are the impressive feats of athleticism and battle, impossible challenges undertaken honorably and accomplished against all odds. Trolls are fundamentally honest creatures, right? The bedrock of Kiths military, though not particularly drawn to the darker arts of warfare, and will quite stubbornly march into certain death before stooping to such underhanded tactics. Their birthrights are Titan's power, which makes them exceptionally strong and athletic, and this power actually only grows the more oaths they take to like truly inhuman levels. And strong of will and body, which makes them more capable of withstanding attempts at manipulation away from their duties and oaths. And here it doesn't matter if it's like a sharp tongue or a supernatural compulsion. It works in both cases. Their frailty is something most trolls choose to see as a strength. The bond of duty, which punishes them severely for breaking oaths, and enrages them beyond control upon being betrayed. As mortals, trolls are usually like big, very large, always strong, whether that be through the sheer bulk that they have or just because they're athletic with the smaller ones. And sometimes a bit brutish in their appearance. Their Famian features blue-gray to blue-green skin and very prominent horns. They're pretty much always inhumanly tall in this, like very huge, massive, and carry this weird mix of like refined nobility and rugged warrioriness that may change a lot with their mood. The Tharlane equivalent to trolls are ogres, who are very much the brutal warrior side stripped of its honor and taken to the extreme. Ogres are powerful war machines, but know nothing of higher ideals. To them, only power is power, and the only power that is muscle power. They're pretty stupid, let's be fair, but they are possessed of a certain cunning that many trolls in their honor blindness lack. Because the Unseelie Court does not have a huge number of trolls at their disposal, they sometimes bolster their ranks of their soldiery with ogres, which are often quite good at masquerading as trolls. The classic and common Seelie troll is a world-class bodybuilder that helps scrawny teenagers get a good workout in and to love sports. A sworn knight to the local fairy lord, they are often at court to make an impression and reassure people that though there are dangers, they are safe. The rare, very rare indeed, Unseelie troll could be a brilliant military tactician, a valued general sent out to get rid of dangerous chimerical beings and Tharlane, aka a ruthless vigilante in the Autumn world, and a huge asset to the local nobility, but one they need to be careful about because many trolls remember that while their she were fucked off and fled to Arcadia, they themselves made excellent lords to protect the commoners from the dark predations of banality. So those were the major Western Kiths, but what if I told you that the majority of changelings are not of these Kiths? They're just the most common ones, and in Europe maybe they make up a majority, but in other parts of the world they are a rare curiosity. Any dream being made up by a human could become a changeling. And though this usually tends to be ancient folkloric legends, there might be, a Protoss Fae being out there that some particularly imaginative kid dreamt up writing StarCraft fanfiction. It's unlikely, but it's possible. What's actually somewhat more likely is that there's a very, very small number of changelings that represent archetypal Starfleet officers or Klingons. Maybe some sort of Lovecraftian creature, though those would probably be Tharlane, as they are very much nightmare beings. These things just exist in the dreaming. What needs to happen is that they need to find a way to undergo the changeling way. And you can play as Tharlane, by the way. You can totally be a nightmare changeling. There's rules for it. Some of the other Kiths that I will have a difficult time pronouncing, but which nonetheless exist in Changeling include Chu Iyu of the Xian or Shinma, found across vast regions of East Asia. Tall, proud, white-haired, chalk-skinned, extremely difficult to lie to, and so they act as judges of their society. They are in fact so objective that they lack empathy. It's also not possible to harm them using metals, which yes, includes cold iron, because changelings of East Asia work just different to the European one. Firbolg, a recently returned Adheen Kith that seems to be working for the Fomorians, Darwinian wilderness survivalists with a propensity for eating raw food, who find purpose in chaos and destruction, and whose sheer presence will manifest the dreaming in utterly impossible ways, often in line with their own will. Once upon a time, these were blessings given out by them to their followers, and they still require sacrifices to sustain themselves. They just don't have as many followers anymore. Glome, a physically mighty and resilient phylum of an anime, which are their elemental fae that incarnate in things, not people. In the case of Glomes, related specifically to stone and rock, which, like all in anime, may be gladelings, meaning bound to natural features such as rock faces, standing stones, or stalagmites, or crofted, which are bound to processed materials like statues, bricks, or a disc of obsidian that is the centerpiece of a fancy piece of jewelry. Kuino, a business kith found predominantly in West Africa who were really good at making money and form a sort of informal syndicate known as The Company. Many of them work to protect their continent's resources from exploitation, making sure that the money stays in Africa, and their ability to instantly find all the loopholes and problems in every contract helps with this. On the other hand, others are entirely part of that exploitation and care only about personal enrichment. They also have 4 eyes, which means they can see good. Yorona, a South American cousin to the Banshee who draw glamour from grief and exist to soothe the pain of grievers, often attending wakes as the mysterious stranger, who many who are tuned into the lore of the supernatural world just assume to be a Yorona. A lot of cultures are much more in touch with that side of themselves. Their outlook on the world is quite fatalist, as they have a strong sense for the strands of fate, which can ironically make them rather insensitive at times. Huguis, an utterly hideous kith of North America's Nunei, who are feared by mortals when really all they want is to find someone who will love them in spite of their corpse-like appearance. They live as hermits who rarely have the opportunity to be their true kindly selves, because they are very kind, unless they use their powers of hypnosis, at which point is any affection that you gained really true affection at all. Shaitan, a type of jinn that, yes, are indeed devils, corruptors, betrayers, who will lull you in with their powers of manipulation, get you to trust them, before they shaitan the betray you just to see you hurt. They love being a bad influence, finding the worst in people and bringing it to the fore, pushing people to lose themselves to their darkest vices and addictions. Volpatinger, long-term residents of the Dreaming who were chimerical animals until shortly after the moon landing. At that point, some of them had the Changeling way enacted upon them by unknown forces for reasons they themselves do not understand. They too are nimbuses of chaos, but in an endearing way, right? They're real glamour hoovers who are keenly aware that many changelings used to see them as a kind of pest back before they had sapiens, and they kinda still do. York, a category of spirit being found in the Australian Dreamtime, often not even as changelings at all, they're just normal fairies. Given how untouched by banality many parts of the outback still are. They live in all the places where water hides. They're remarkably similar to mermaids, albeit much more colorful, who save those dying of both thirst and drowning, able to influence the weather and transform into all manner of animals. And honestly, really, truly, a potentially infinite amount more. Look up local legends of yours. Tell me what kind of kiths may live in your area in the comments below. Right, this is quite similar to the video I did on meta-humanity in the Shadowrun setting some years ago, which you can check out if you can stomach Beardless Burger. But there's so much potential, there's so much space for you to realize yourself in this. That's one of my favorite aspects of the Changeling setting. So okay, how do all these fairies govern themselves? Well, by and large, most areas are managed in a feudalistic fashion, centered around important nimbuses of power called freeholds, which is somewhat analogous to castles in terms of like the role they play strategically and economically. They're located in the dreaming, usually the near dreaming, but connect to the autumn world, so they're places of high magic, shielded from the encroachment of banality by something called a balefire, which usually takes the literal form of a hearthfire, and which is a constant source of glamour for all those who sleep in its vicinity. Lighting a balefire and constructing a freehold around it is a complicated process that requires a large investment of glamour, and not all balefires and freeholds are made equal. These places are undoubtedly the heart of Kiths society, and owning one will invariably attract other changelings that will, by law, tradition, and just plain common sense, help you tend to it and protect it. Or they might try to steal it from you, that could also happen. There are many freeholds controlled by commoners these days, because when the noble fairy fled Earth, they left behind those same freeholds that were once the base of their power, as the castle was just there, you might as well take it. The reason that most freeholds have sort of returned to nobility control is firstly, that the dreaming itself returned ownership to their ancestral masters, because the nobles are, for better or worse, sort of ordained to rule. There's also the fact that many freeholds have started to pop back up and are being rediscovered ever since glamour has flooded back into the world, and coming from inside the dreaming as opposed to the autumn world, plus remembering ancient secrets, many of the noble fae were able to snatch up the best real estate, often the real estate that they used to have for themselves. Many powerful commoner freehold holders were also made into nobles and vassalized, so they may not be she, but legally speaking, and in terms of like the dreaming respecting and supporting their legitimacy, they're nobles. A freehold can look like anything, and really it's generally a chimerical place, so it will look like one thing in the mundane autumn world and may look like a similar or completely different place in the local dreaming. It'll often reflect the aesthetic of its owner or owners, much like the near dreaming tends to reflect the nature of its rightful ruler, and be full of magic that has a life of its own. A willow-framed pond in a park may be a glorious castle of ivory-colored marble, its walls and turrets draped with greenery, glistening waterfalls purling off its sides. The inside is open, spacious, and generously greened, colourful torch bugs and dragonflies flitting around between the tapestries made of living ivy, and it always smells like it's just rained. A small cinema tucked away between austere buildings downtown may indeed be a glorious temple of fracturing light, with floors of black obsidian and walls of radiant crystal that have a complicated mechanism of panes and lenses behind them that, when arranged in certain ways that you can configure on a panel, can project any set of furniture into any room in any style. A merely large barrel in an old brewery may indeed be gigantic on the inside, an inn that smells of oak wood and whiskey, where rosemary ale and honey oat lager are always on tap. Wood pillars are carved into knots holding up galleries upon galleries of rooms and sitting areas on above, all lit and warmed by the giant chandelier that holds the freehold's balefire. Most freeholds actually connect directly to trods in the dreaming, so they're not just safe havens from banality, but also provide a convenient entry point to the world that spawned all changelings in the first place. They're governed by laws of hospitality, many of which have come about specifically to protect all changelings, no matter how lost, from the predation of banality. There used to be natural freeholds called glades that were shared by a lot of different changelings, but these have all but disappeared at this point with how much nature has been destroyed, so privately owned freeholds must serve this function now. Now, how many levels of feudalism are above any freehold depends, though there is usually at least like a duke or duchess, who then might be the vassal of a king or queen, who then might be the vassal of a high king or high queen in turn. The major through line that defines the major political directions are the courts, and within the context of those courts, the noble houses, which, in spite of there being like two of them, two courts, the Seelie and the Unseelie Court, representing light and darkness, the seasons with long days and the seasons with short days, they're not actually a black and white affair, ironically. And every changeling, among many other beings of the dreaming, have elements of Seelie and Unseelie within them called legacies. It's just that one tends to be sort of dominant over the other, so that, that becomes the court that they align with. And this may change over the course of that changeling's life, though if it never changes, that's also normal. The courts used to be just constantly at war with each other, but after the nobles left, this conflict cooled significantly. And with the problems and practicalities of the modern world, it really does not make much sense for the courts to remain actively at each other's throats all the time. They're not equally matched anyway, if we're honest. Like, the Seelie Court is clearly dominant, and even though they're supposed to abdicate the throne to the Unseelie Court during autumn and winter, they just sort of don't do that, much to the chagrin of many parts of changeling society. Overlapping with the courts are the noble houses, of which there are 14 major ones, 7 of them aligned with the Seelie, and then also 7 of them aligned with the Unseelie Court. They all have their own agendas and alliances that often go like across court lines, and members of a house that is aligned with one court may actually be personally aligned more with the other court. So you can think of the houses as like political dynasties, and of the courts as political parties within the framework of which these dynasties operate. These are essentially families, except inheritance is ideally passed down to the same person that originally held or holding, except of course when that's like not possible or undesirable. Like for instance, when it takes a while for a particular Sidhe to reincarnate, that can be a problem. You don't want all that sitting empty for that long. Basically, when a Sidhe has undergone chrysalis, after their seining, they undergo an additional set of rites that determines which noble house they are a part of and which rank they now occupy in it. This is complicated by the fact that many Sidhe are recent arrivals in the autumn world and popped in such a manner as to not entirely become changelings, because they thought reincarnation was for commoners, and they were going to be immortal and just fix everything within a single human lifetime. After all, how short could a human life be? Like 200, 300 years? Plenty of time. Many of these have been forced to undertake the changeling way or, die, which means they become new people. But obviously, we never know where they will be born and what kind of people they will be when they reincarnate. A kindly Seelie lord in the Duchy of Cotton might become a cruel Unseelie lady in the Duchy of the Lone Star in their next incarnation, retaining from their face self only their house and their willingness to fight for what they care about, which manifests in this case not as a protective instinct over the commoners they're trying to protect, but as bellicoseness in the pursuit of certain political ideals. Inheritance of titles and freeholds rarely follows just dynasty lines, but often also fosterage lines. And of course, fosterage is determined before seining, so when you adopt a Sidhe for fosterage, you never know what house they're going to turn out to have been in a year. Sometimes noble changelings decide to pass their titles to someone that usually would not inherit them, be it because they are of the right house, the right court, any number of reasons really, up to and including the fact that in this particular jurisdiction, they just don't get to decide who inherits the titles, but it's put up to like a vote of their underlings or maybe even the commoners. So all in all, a very complicated proposition full of weird clauses and exceptions, as it should be for arcane feudalistic societies that didn't really have to deal with the concept of inheritance until somewhat recently. Also a lot of potential for war and conflict, like including attempts to convince the dreaming itself, which will tend to enforce the rulership of one fae but not another, but that can be very difficult to achieve. The Seelie Court is the court of spring and summer, the courtly court of nobility and romance and beauty and family. They're governed by a complex codices of laws and ancient traditions they stick to because they believe that the past as imagined by them, is the only way they're going to survive into the future. They value kindness, compassion, service, and dedication, and see themselves as guardians of the humanity from whence their dream arises. The code that governs the Seelie Court has 4 tenets. Death before dishonor, which places the highest value on chivalry, to value the idea of one's purpose in society more than one's own life. Love conquers all, which venerates the power of love, all kinds of love, but really especially the kitsch and pageantry of romantic love. Not only does love strengthen commitment, it fuels the dreams that nourish the dreaming. Beauty is life, which sanctifies the elegant and the gorgeous, the things that are a joy to behold, not just because they're visually pleasing, but also spiritually, emotionally, philosophically. Beauty inspires and thus must be protected. Never forget a debt, which dictates that kind must be repaid in kind, otherwise there would be no trust, and the systems that underlie society would simply cease to function. This works with its own inversion as well, though, which is that if someone wrongs you, you are within your rights to wrong them back, and should indeed do so for pretty much the same reasons. House Belmain are the edgy and angsty stare into the abyss type house, an unusual dark and broody entry into the Seelie Court. They're noble knights acting as monster hunters, primarily of like dreaming type monsters, like the servants of the Fomorians, the Tharlane, but also many prodigals, which are other supernatural beings. For this purpose, the Dark Stars have keen senses and a 7th sense for detecting nightmare beings, with the downside that those nightmare beings have an easier time identifying them in turn. They're also both plagued and blessed with prophetic visions that are often difficult to make sense of. They're quite isolated politically, actually, and a few other houses trust them outside of like acknowledging their usefulness and dedication to hunting monsters, which is mainly due to the fact that there is a common belief among many members of the house that cold iron is not actually the death of fairy kind, but a path to its liberation from the physical coil. As I said, very angsty. Discussion of this kind of heresy is best kept to the guild halls of Star Realms Online, which is an MMO that they operate. Yes, you heard that right. These guys basically, they hang out in WoW guild chat. That's what they do. House Dougal is the fancy steampunk inventor type house, the productive and industrious engine of the Seelie Court. A standout because they look for salvation not necessarily in the past, as most Seelie do, but in the innovations of the future. The Smiths love science and engineering, microtechnology, rocket ships, and other such high-tech trappings. While at the same time, they're not at all above more traditional and artistic crafts. It's the passion for the craft itself that is their favorite flavor of glamour. And, there it doesn't really matter whether you're building a canoe or 3D printing a miniature wind farm. They all have a natural affinity for craftsmanship. Their whole line is imbued with talent, and they can truly dedicate themselves to a project like few others can. Interestingly, their passions manifest physically the more powerful they become, as parts of their body are replaced with prosthetics like, artificial heart chambers, clockwork legs, that kind of stuff. This process also does lead them to lose touch with their humanity and inherent empathy, which for some is a very small price to pay. This is where you'll find the tech priests. House Alenid is the mysterious wizard type house, the secretive spies and arcane advisors of the Seelie Court. They're the uncontested masters of the magical arts, mainly because they just do not allow themselves to be contested. They go to great lengths to keep all their magical secrets secret. They maintain vast libraries of lore that only members of the house can access, and trade with each other in all manner of privileged information. The internet and really any kind of virtual world fascinate them, and so one of their main libraries can be found in the cloud. They have a keen sense of magic, and they can usually tell who is casting what and why, and they'll want to find out because they're so obsessed with secrets. Their morbid curiosity will cause them to take great risks to find out everything they're not supposed to know about. They do share information with other houses within the Seelie Court usually, but only if they know they'll listen, right? The sorcerers saw the Sundering coming, they're one of the few who did, and nobody listened to them back then. So they're still kind of miffed by this. House Fiona is the BPD Daredevil type house. The bacchanal gossip queens of the Seelie Court that not only make up the social glue between the noble houses, but the social glue between the noble houses and the commoners. No other house is as beloved by non-noble fae, and this isn't just because they throw absolutely magnificent and exuberant parties that everyone's invited to, but because they genuinely value and respect commoners and have many ennobled ones among their ranks. In fact, when the shattering happened, Fiona herself, the Fiona, the founder of the house, stayed behind on Earth, even as most of her house left. The true hearts of the Fiona have a lion's courage and know no fear. No monster drives terror into them unless that monster is threatening a loved one. The dark side of this being that they also love fear. At least that, the tingling sensation they get when they do something stupid and dangerous, so much so that they can't resist it. This combination makes them great and also terrible as in shite warriors, who can overcome seemingly invincible resistance through sheer audacity, but at the same time will run knowingly into death, just because there's a slim chance they will live. House Gwydion is the archetypal noble ruler who is of noble nobility type house. The wise warrior kings of the Seelie Court, who hold the most actual political power and represent the ideals of their court the best, with all the good and the bad that entails. The High King of Concordia, America, David Ardry, is, for instance, a Gwydion. And look, yes, okay, this house, it has my name on it. This right here is and always has been my legal name, though I have been taught to pronounce it Gideon, not Gwydion, and I'm not sure if even it's the accurate pronunciation, because the pronunciation guide in the book that it's for Americans, really. At the end of the day, it's my name. I don't care how it's written. If I want to pronounce it, fucking... I can do that. I sure as shit am not teaching you the nuances of how to speak my true name. I am no fool, my friend. I know the power that brings. The house itself is made up of paragons of Seelie tradition, and as such is quite conservative and stuck in its ways. Not unjust, honor and compassion are after all some of the highest values of the Seelie Court, but in their proud bearing they have had quite a difficult time adjusting to the way things are in the autumn world these days, especially given that almost all of them left during the interregnum. In order to carry out their regal duties, they are just above court intrigue and people presenting them with false information, as they are gifted with an ability to detect lies. So if you harbor a dislike for a Gwydion, you best not cross paths with them, because they are also extremely easily slighted and petty as fuck in their vengeance, as is also the Seelie courtly ideal. House Liam is the gentle, charitable, somewhat dull house that the other members of the Seelie Court accept only reluctantly, because they committed a great crime: loving humanity. Especially way back when, fairy lords tended to look at humans like a farmer would look at his sheep. Right, they were good for making wool, and sometimes you had to shear that wool, but that was about it. When banality first crept in, many powerful Chi advocated for a genocide of all those who carried banality, or as they would have said, they wanted to cull the herd. It was only through the actions of House Liam that this didn't come to pass, and though these days the nobility is in agreement that they were right, they've not been forgiven for being right. They can take away other people's pain and suffering, using their glamour to neutralize banality in humans and nightmare glamour in changelings. They're so deeply embedded in mortal society that they are inherently touched by banality themselves. Their main wheelhouse is charitable work, especially through religious organizations, and they love the glamour that comes from religious worship. So they're deeply embedded in the various Christian churches that exist. House Scar is the lone wolf warrior type house, vigilantes much more so than actual nobility. They are aligned with the Seelie Court, but not not truly part of it, and they prefer it that way. Their business is to travel the world and do dangerous shit, whether it be exploring new trods, fighting monsters, or deposing tyrants. They are rare and rarely seen, having a natural talent for stealth, and are often not really all that interested even in revealing who they are to everyone around, because especially the nobility looks down on them for being not real nobility. Commoners in dire needs always hope that one of the Grey Walkers, as they're known, will happen by to save them. And in this, they do not look exclusively to the she. Precisely because they don't really care to be seen as noble, House Scar includes many commoners. Or, ennobled commoners, I suppose. Probably like half of them, which, still doesn't amount to very much in the grand scheme of things, because the Grey Walkers are a very small house, but it shows their priorities. The Unseelie Court is the court of autumn and winter, the wild court of true power and unbridled rebellion. They believe the old ways are shit, that even the dreaming itself has abandoned them, and that one should take no prisoners in the quest for survival, for the world is harsh and unfair, and while that is certainly tragic, it's about adapting or dying. They value strength, freedom, instinct, and self-reliance, and see themselves as being who need glamour to survive, so why wouldn't they just take it? The code that governs the Unseelie Court also has 4 tenets. Change is good, which acknowledges that things are not in fact static, but ever-shifting, and to cling to a certain structure means nothing if not certain death. Instead, one must embrace the chaos, learn to ride it like a wave, and draw into question all that is established. Glamour is free, which declares the controlled hoarding, rationing, and cultivation of glamour foolish and a tool of oppression. It's there to be harvested, so harvest it, because it'll eventually just grow back. This is how the Unseelie justify their practice of ravaging. Honor is a lie, which belittles the notion that people will keep their word, and thinks of all that rely on others to keep up their end of the bargain as naive fools. If you want people to do something for you, it must be in their interest to do that thing as well, not just your own. Passion before duty, which rebels against the chains of obligations and the banality that it brings. Existence is fleeting and there to be enjoyed, not squandered on those who think they should have the power to control you. House Aeson is the northern Viking warrior type house. Ranges of the wilderness and the thin spaces where forest meets dreaming, guarding the world against incursions of nightmares, and guarding fairy society against the moral decay of play pretending to be human. They are indubitably part of the Unseelie Court, but see themselves as above politics. Not because they're greater than the other houses, but purer than them, focused on the glamour-filled wilds instead of the banality-clogged civilization. The Northmen, as they're called due to their origins in Scandinavia, all have the gift of speaking to animals, and they identify with wild beasts much more than they do humans, which makes it a bit of a problem that they are all effectively stuck in human bodies as changelings. They despise this because, they don't really see humans as much more than prize cattle. Valuable, to be sure, but ultimately just a source for sustenance and wealth, maybe. For this reason, none of them are able to tap into their own humanity to generate glamour through rapture. House Aeliel is the Dark Lord-driven villain-type house and act as the keystone of the Unseelie Court. They are fiercely competitive and prize excellence above all else, fostering their own to become the best of the best at whatever it is they do, and then also expecting a lot in return. They are keen political strategists, preternaturally skilled at subterfuge. For this reason, many people don't trust them, but they really can't deny their value and what they bring to the Unseelie Court, as they tend to be really good at what they do because they get fostered to be that. Internally, they may seem, and definitely are, a backstabbing lot, but not so much as to threaten the integrity of the house itself, given that the absolute masters of the craft of backstabbing have proven excellent at harnessing the vast talent and diligence found in their networks in order to work on restoring the Seelie-Unseelie balance that is supposed to be the natural order of things. It's a good thing that's the case too, because you will never find an allele admitting they're wrong about this or any other thing that they espouse. House Baelor is the savage demon-type house, driven not so much by a disregard for humanity than a hatred of the fey nobility of Arcadia, as they are in fact descended from the Fomorians and their nightmare servants, in a metaphysical sense at least. You know, the genetic lines and all that, it doesn't really work that way in the Dreaming. They embrace their hellish nightmare side, which is apparent in the hideous deformities they all carry, either from birth or from the moment they become official members of the house, and which manifest in a non-supernatural way, even in their mortal seeming. Their ultimate goal, which they follow with an almost Sisyphean dedication, with a surprising amount of success too, is to conquer just the whole Autumn world, control all of it, and cut off Arcadia from the glamour that it provides. In this, they have an unexpected ally, Cold Iron, which they can wield against their enemies, though it still does pose a significant danger to themselves as well, because they are still fairies. They have almost no errant members in the Seelie Court, for, obvious reasons, and they do actually have a few members that are of the fairy kiths that serve the Fomorians, the Tharlane, which we mentioned earlier. House Daron are the really very strongly adhering to the laws of hospitality to the letter type house. Not the spirit, the letter. Given lands many aeons ago for their excellent skills as healers and herbalists, which does, of course, include the art of poisoning. They're the homesteaders and safe haven keepers of the Unseelie Court, and feel a deep sense of betrayal at the fact that one of their own saw to it that the leaders of all the other houses would make it through the gates of Arcadia, only to then be left behind himself. This deep wound, a mark against everyone else's honor, has changed the way the hosts, as they're often called, engage in the hospitality to which they are still very much bound. They'd provide shelter to their mortal enemies if need be. That's no problem, and the Dreaming itself comes to their aid when they protect their guests. But woe be the person who transgresses against the very specifically laid out rules, right? Who takes more than they're offered, overstays their welcome, or gives nothing in return. The Daron are gracious hosts, right until your throat swells up. House Danan is the truly dreaming-focused house, aligned only nominally with the Unseelie Court and very accepting of Seelie members, as well as commoners, being the only house that's formally ruled by someone who is not she, but instead an Eshu. Of course, reaching them in the first place is rather difficult, because unlike the other houses, they hang out pretty much exclusively inside of the Dreaming. And I'm not talking about the adjacent to the real world Dreaming here. In fact, for decades, the other houses didn't even know they were there. Because, they assumed that with the moon landing, all the other houses that left Arcadia, they just went back to the normal world. But House Danan, they just weren't interested in that, right? They came here to explore the Dreaming, not the Autumn world. Of course, as we know, spending much time in the Dreaming can be dangerous to Changelings, as they may fall victims to Bedlam, except if they are Danan, because the Danan have their ways of staving off Bedlam. Not only that, but they can navigate the Dreaming pretty safely thanks to their ability to invoke ancient oaths and passphrases that protect them from many chimerical monstrosities. This focus on the Dreaming also makes them suffer a sort of reverse banality, or rather reverse mists, which instead of making them forget the Dreaming in the Autumn world, makes them forget information about the Autumn world in the Dreaming. House Lianon is the toxic entertainment industry type house. Members of the Unseelie Court who are very involved with keeping the herds brimming with glamour. They are patrons of the arts, which is quite a noble turn. What they really are is agents, managers, often inspirational icons even, that's true. They have massive pull in the media business, big influencers on TikTok. They will catapult young starlets to the height of their fame, and then leave them burnt out and with a cocaine problem a couple years later. This of course nets a ton of glamour, but it's not exactly sustainable. And to be fair to the muses, they are cursed with a very unfortunate way. They age more quickly than any other type of changeling, like physically their human form, and it's only through the acquisition of glamour from mortals that they can hold and reverse this process. The fucked up thing is that revelry, like the particular thing that a specific kith gains glamour from, does not rejuvenate them. They cannot gain glamour from it, so they need to get it from mortals. They really have no other choice, you will without a doubt believe, because the Lianan are blessed with unspeakable charisma. They can talk you into anything. House Varik is the Russian-type house. They have cold hearts that are unable to love because they have forsworn that emotion entirely after their founder was tricked by love, which makes them ironically quite dramatic. Their detachment from emotions allows them to see things and how they're related to each other more clearly than anyone, and though they have no supernatural powers to predict the future, they can discern what's going to happen with impressive acuity. It's how they managed to leave long before the shattering happened. Manipulating the web of causality is mainly what they do most of the time, whether it be horse races, the stock market, or fairy noble politics. The only things truly hidden from the Variks are plots buried so deep they barely have any effect anymore. Either that or, they're matters of true passion, which certainly the Variks are not blind to, but they find them rather a bit more unpredictable, simply because they just don't understand them. The only use they have for love is to harvest the hope it induces for glamour, and it's really not their favorite kind. In addition to the two courts, Kithane society also acknowledges the existence of a third court known as the Shadow Court. It's not considered like an equal to the other courts, and quite frankly, it isn't even non-partisan. It's just an underground faction aligned with the Unseelie Court that meets up every year on Halloween to do a huge party and draw attention to the fact that the Seelie Court should be ceding power to them for half the year, but doesn't. What the Shadow Court definitely isn't is a funny and ironic front for the infiltration of the courts by Fomorian interests, trying to undermine the system altogether and return with the power of nightmares behind them. No fam! That is not what this is at all. There are also the Dauntain, and they're a bit more complicated. Yes, I know they all end in "ain." Remember how banality fucks with fairy kind here in the Autumn World? Well, it's called the Autumn World because, to quote a guy I once saw have his head chopped off, winter is coming. That's a timely that's a cool reference that really reveals that I am in touch with the youth. Even though right now, with the whole flooding and floodings, we've got quite a bit more glamour going on than we did for a long time, there is ever more banality in the world as well, and the Kithane suspect that this will eventually undo all of fairy kind forever. Or until spring arrives, which a lot of people really do not trust will happen. Some even say that winter is over and spring is now, which makes a lot of sense to me. It's not autumn, it's you all came back, and if we want to avoid a Silent Springs type scenario, because of all the banality that's here, we need to fight the forces of banality for it. Mortals of the Autumn World have different levels of banality, going from imaginative dreamers who love to come up with stuff and have great aspirations about it, to those terribly narrow-minded middle-class curmudgeons who eschew all that is improper, propriety being solely their things that are within their personal lifestyle. As well as, the old lady who calls the cops on anyone so much as thinking about having fun in the evening, and, terminally online haters who think everything that is remotely interesting is hella cringe. These are known as autumn people, and changelings try to avoid interacting with them too much because they are killers of playfulness and joy, and, thus walking fonts of banality. And then there are Dauntain. They're like autumn people, except they are changelings. Or rather, they're not quite changelings. Usually what happened is that they were so wrapped up in banality already when the chrysalis came that they violently rejected it. The visions of the greater world out there were pushed back with heavy medication, isolation, certain types of therapy, so their face selves don't just never manifest, they're manifest wrong. And then they are active enemies of the dreaming, and all it entails. And in many cases, who can blame them? The autumn world is stressful enough, and the dreaming is full of nightmares. That's just extra. Have you been to a Chuck E. Cheese lately? The near dreaming in them shits is full of animate automata that will try to eat you. Like, who wants to enter a world like that? Dauntain are as diverse as changelings, right? Ranging from tragic victims of circumstance to, like, malicious malcontents with an axe to grind. They all have some level of awareness of the dreaming and changelings, which is what makes them so dangerous. But usually, they understand the dreaming to be like some sort of delusion they need to cleanse themselves and the world of. Others, meanwhile, are fully aware of the reality of the dreaming, and often used to be proper changelings themselves that became Dauntain. They had their own reasons to swear to destroy the dreaming, or otherwise seek power over changelings by wielding banality. Some even think that embracing banality is what changelings need to do in order to survive the coming winter. Whatever their individual reasons and modus operandi, Kiths tend to avoid or fight the Dauntain. They are the opposite of their interests made incarnate, and they will use any means at their disposal to wage war against them. Every Dauntain destroyed is a little less banality in the world. Or at least so goes the way oversimplified political narrative. Now, we have hinted a lot at the cool and impressive magical powers that changelings have access to, but the only thing we've really talked about are the birthrights of the various fairy Kiths, when there's really actually so much more than that. It used to be Fae could just make shit happen by unleashing pure dreaming into the world, filtered through their particular Kith, and they could essentially generate any effect they wanted this way. This is still possible, it's quite aptly called unleashing, but it comes with too great a cost to do it on the regular. And in a world where glamour is sparse and banality is high, we just can't be manifesting the dreaming around willy-nilly like this any longer. There needs to be moderation, and that moderation is achieved through the finesse of weaving cantrips out of arts and realms. This is not the only kind of magic, especially like non-Kiths have access to, but it's the main and most important one. Basically, when you cast a cantrip, you're manifesting a specific potential from the dreaming into the autumn world, or just another part of the dreaming, by force of intent. A realm is a type of idea, and an art is a specific way in which that idea is manipulated. Each changeling is attuned to different realms, with each Kith having an affinity realm that is easiest for them to work with, and also each changeling uses a particular set of arts that they've chosen to learn. To make weaving cantrips easier, changelings invite the dreaming in by essentially creating an environment that is familiar to it. This environment represents the ideas related to the desired effect, not necessarily the laws of physics, or God forbid, common sense. For instance, if I wanted to punch someone in the face really hard, I might do the Popeye arm swing. I don't know if this, I think he did it like this. It was this way around. I do this a few times as seen in cartoons, it becomes easier for me to punch someone hard. Or if I wanted to jump a really long distance, I might squat down like an imp. Simple bunks like this usually have only a limited effect in inviting the dreaming in. More complex, time-consuming, expensive, or simply outrageous and risky bunks will make manifesting the dreaming even easier. Say for instance I wanted to harden my skin to make it impenetrable to weapons. Coating myself head to toe in a mixture of pine sap and crushed amber would achieve this. If I wanted to make my enemy sick, I might make a doll replica of them and then smear it with dog shit. Really, any justifiably related ideas are potential bunks, so there's a lot of room for creativity here. There are 6 realms that changelings use their cantrips on. Other Fae may target other realms, and some of them, like the elemental realms of the inanimate, may even be learned by Kiths. It's possible, though challenging, to target several realms at once, and unfortunately, that is also often necessary to achieve particular effects. Actor concerns non-Fae entities that are possessed of a reasonable semblance of sapience. The classic example of this is humans. You may have heard of them. Humans fall within actor, but also other kinds of supernatural beings, including ghosts, whether incorporeal or not, because it is the actor that matters, not their corporeality. Anyone with an understanding of actor can cast cantrips on a close friend or loved one, but things get a lot more difficult once you move into knowing people less, or even having preconceived judgments about them. The most difficult thing to do is cast cantrips on actors that are complete strangers to you. Fae is similar to actors, except as it relates to any and all beings of the dreaming. Given that there's a lot of different beings in the dreaming, this doesn't just mean Fae. It's easiest with commoners and gets harder with nobles, reflecting the very real privilege that exists in the dreaming, and then becomes increasingly difficult the more alien the glamour the being is made up of. Up to the strangest of Ghislaine and even like inanimate objects in the dreaming. Nature governs, intuitively, all that is natural, right? Things that simply exist and would exist if no intent had ever crafted them. At its most basic, this means like the four elements, right? In their form of the four elements. Earth, air, water, and fire. No ice, lightning bullshit. Going up to grown, perhaps even processed materials like wood, to animals, to mastery over the weather, and other large-scale natural phenomena. Prop is the other side of that coin, concerning itself with all the things that are made, shaped by intent, usually by human, but also very often non-human hands. Simple targets of the realm are, well, not actually all that simple, but things you would often carry on your person, like your clothes, jewelry, or the pen you always have in your pocket. That same pen, not always worn in your pocket, could not be manipulated by anyone but an experienced journeyman of prop. True masters can affect highly complex machines and magical artifacts made of alien materials. Scene is a special realm in that it is primarily used to spatially expand the effect of other realms, but it can also be used to manipulate space itself, like, when an interior is supposed to be bigger than it would seem from the outside, which still also requires it to be used in conjunction with another realm. The sizes it affects are a bit abstract, right? The smallest being a single room, not too large, and the biggest being a whole neighborhood. Time is similar in this regard, and it does not, in fact, allow for time travel, allegedly, but rather it allows you to expand the size of your cantrip temporally, making it last longer, constricting others to last shorter, or suspending it to be triggered at certain points in the future. Someone with a basic grasp of time can triple the amount of time a cantrip that they cast lasts, whatever amount that originally was, while the true Time Lords can make great cyclical spells that come and go with the seasons, celestial events, or other meaningful markers of time. Now, if realms are the material of thought that you work with, your art is the particular craft you apply. Unlike realms, which are meant to be at least in spirit all-encompassing in their totality, there is an enormous number of arts. So maybe not quite as many as there are Kiths. Some are more common, and also common with a capital C, than others. I'm about to list all the important arts, as well as some of the more unknown or restricted ones, and it bears noting that not all of these appear in every edition of the game. But this is a lore video, not a mechanics video, and just because something isn't mechanically defined does not mean it does not exist in the world you're playing. Usually you'll be able to identify the defunct ones because the little symbol that I'll put up looks more like 1997 than 2017. Aphrodisia is quite literally the power of love. The ability to instill affection in someone, be it a liking, a passing infatuation, all the way to a sudden unspeakable dedication that will make you do anything for love, including that, as well as sacrifice your lifelong lover or drown yourself in the depths of the sea for someone you've only just laid eyes upon. And that is indeed where this power came from. It is emblematic of the Fae that inhabit the waterways and the depths of the ocean, and you can actually find it in here, the famous crab sourcebook for World of Darkness, known as Blood-Dimmed Tides, which includes a bunch of material for all of the major World of Darkness game lines, and actually, unironically, is just very good. In later editions, parts of this art have been subsumed into spring and summer. Bunks for this art include doing a seductive dance, spraying yourself with particular perfumes, rubbing jasmine oil in your ear, whispering at someone from a distance, burning some sunflower petals, or drinking a mixture of rosewater and milk and spitting it in your target's face. Autumn is the only one of the seasonal arts that is forbidden, or at least frowned upon, and pertains to the forces of death and decay. Because yes, the nights of winter may be longer, but the lengthening of nights that happens in autumn and the fact that there are still leaves on the trees makes the shadows even darker, so they too are part of this art. Autumn can take years of life away from a person and detect whatever it is that's going to ultimately cause an old building's demise. It can even curse targets with visitors from the beyond. Bunks for this art include lurking in the dark, groaning like an elderly person, drying some dead leaves, calling out to the ghosts beyond, eating rotten food, closing your eyes in order to see, spreading grave dirt on a target, growing rare mushrooms, stealing a hospital gown somebody died in today, or just it being autumn. Chicanery is the art of messing with people's minds, like not the real world, but the perception of it and of themselves. This ranges from altering minor stimuli and deleting yourself from other people's perceptions, similar to the vampiric discipline of obfuscate, to becoming able to instill powerful and all-encompassing emotions, and even implant memories, Inception style. Subtlety is of course half the art, as people are more likely to doubt things they consider more unreal and unrealistic, but at some point you just become so powerful you can make a kid think his name is Finger. Bunks for this art include blatantly lying about your identity, having a painting of yourself and washing off the colors, wearing disguises, getting your face rearranged by someone who knows how to punch, pulling your cap down like this, throwing a flashlight in the trash, or putting on a famously emotional record. Infusion is a tightly guarded secret of Knockers that only very few outsiders are skilled in, which allows one to rearrange the elements of sentience and sapience as quanta of dream stuff. That sounds a bit complicated, let me explain. It's very simple. Essentially, infusion allows you to make talking swords and mechanical clockwork servants, as well as just work with chimerical objects in highly sophisticated ways in general, like recombining materials at a sort of molecular level. The most basic forms can combine chimerical materials in rather unintuitive arrangements, whereas true masters of infusion can create servitor minds from pure glamour. Bunks for this art include building the most unnecessarily convoluted assembly lines imaginable, crafting thingamabobs that you can then use as tools, doing maths poorly and incorrectly specifically to get the results you want, just throwing everything off the desk because it's all stupid and ridiculous, or blindfolding yourself to solder on live wires by intuition alone. Krios is another art from the Crab book. It's actually fairly straightforward. It makes you freeze people and things. You can generate cold, which of course is not just, that's not how physics works, but it is how the mind thinks that physics works intuitively. And this goes from just making people be in need of a jacket to summoning the kind of arctic winds that climate change is going to make a thing of the past in a couple of years. You can even freeze a person in a solid block of ice, like comedy. In more modern editions, its powers are integrated with the art of winter. Bunks for this art include speaking in an unpleasant, cold whisper, putting on ice cube underneath your tongue, wearing the colors blue and white, fumbling with like a snowflake pendant, doesn't need to be a real snowflake, could be plastic, actively doing the shivering motion, that I can't really do it because I have to hold the microphone right now, or giving someone an icy stare. Legerdemain, or legerdemain if you want to sound pretentious about it, and both of these ways of saying it are correct and legitimate, by the way, is the fortuitous sleight of hand you'd expect to see at a magic show. Except it's not sleight of hand, it's legitimately telekinesis, and quite a bit of illusion weaving. Actually making the coin appear behind someone's ear is child's play with this, and dropping a piano on someone's head is not that much more difficult. Trickery and thievery are at the heart of this art, so the higher you go in learning it, the more you will be able to make people see exactly what you want them to. Like, you know, the Fabergé egg you just stole from the museum, but it appears like it's still there. Bugs for this art include clapping your hands to draw attention to something, making a card disappear from your hand, putting 2 fingers to your temple and, like, looking as though you were concentrating, unveiling an illusion with a sheet of cloth, performing a very precise and particular set of foot movements, or chucking all the rings from your hands into the abyss. Metamorphosis is the art of transfiguring things into other things. In the beginning, at least, this effect seems more than it is, and it is minor, often easily reversed, like changing your hair color. But eventually, practitioners learn increasingly improbable things like changing sizes, turning people into animals, partially or fully, or eventually just turning anything into mythological creatures that you yourself may have come up with on the spot. Bunks for this art include eating whatever you're trying to transform into, putting on clothes made of its skin, manipulating a drawing of a thing to make it look like another thing, going on at length about how truly you know that deep inside you are that thing, dousing someone you want to turn into a frog in pond water, or cutting yourself so something new can emerge. Aneromancy is the art of interacting with dreams, by which I don't mean the dreaming, but actual particular dreams dreamt by mortal minds. It allows you to see people's dreams easily, enter them, alter them, to give rest and recuperation, or maybe horrible nightmares if you prefer, use them as shortcuts through the dreaming with a capital D, and even control them entirely, which, to be fair, isn't really something that many changelings love to see happening. Bunks for this art include sleeping under an open sky, making a dream catcher out of good materials, doing reality checks as you would for your lucid dreaming, perfuming your blanket, sleeping the wrong way round in your bed, drawing open eyes onto your eyelids, or whispering your name into a target's ear 3 times as they are asleep. Primal is the art of controlling the natural world, reshaping it to suit one's own needs, hardening your coat to be made of stone, learning the whole appearance of a person from the imprints they left in the snow, and manifesting the elements. True masters can create cold fire and hot ice even in stable configurations, or imbue themselves or others, including things, with elemental qualities, such as gaining the slickness of oil or the lightness of air. This is not transfiguration, it is melding with the core elements of nature. Bunks for this art include diving deep under the water, daring the clouds to make it rain, burning a piece of amber, smashing a crystal bauble, stepping onto an invisible stairwell, eating some matches to breathe fire, covering your face with sand, staring right into the sun, or holding your breath. Pyretics is the art of fire and heat, and you might say, hang on, didn't we just talk about Primal? Isn't that what just came before this? Well, you know, this is not just about the elemental aspects of fire, but also about its associated ideas. It is much easier with this than with Primal to manifest only constituent elements of fire, like its light or its heat, and like have fine control over them. Those who wield this art more adeptly can invoke its associated concepts like purification, as it burns away all that doesn't belong, revelation, as there is truth in the flames, and rebirth, as the ashes fertilize what comes after. Bunks for this art include really anything related to fire, from lighting it, to eating it, to soaking it, to drawing it. You could also spray a surface with purifying acetone, crush something flammable into pieces, paint your skin red, orange, yellow, point a blinding flashlight at your own eyes, or hold glowing embers in your hands. gremlins. Skycraft is also an elemental power, and it's originally from the Crab book, but it actually exists in the latest versions of the game as its own thing, and it relates to the control of weather and the heavens. The wind itself becomes your ally in this, helping you run fast or make a dramatic entrance with the coat and all that. The sound of thunder deafens your enemies, and if you are a true master, lightning strikes down from the sky. In terms of associated concepts, it allows you to do things like summon gremlins to make technology malfunction, which not only works via the electricity association, but also because gremlins, I don't know if you know this, they come from the sky, right? They first appeared in the cultural canon during World War II, when things would malfunction in the high-stress environments of Allied bomber planes. This usually was because, somebody fucked up. It's a complex machine, but it's much easier and better for morale to blame the gremlins than whoever made that mistake. Bunks for this art include shouting very loudly, standing in the storm and daring it to take you, blowing against the wind with all your might, looking at the weather forecast and deliberately not dressing for the weather, throwing a frisbee with symbols painted on it, smashing a circuit board, setting batteries on fire, throwing a water balloon up into the sky, or attaching a bunch of copper coins to your hat. Sidhe is the art of reading the infinitely intricate tapestry of fate, known as UNDONE. This is a highly interpretive and intuitive process, as everything in UNDONE is connected. Nothing is discrete information. It's all about reading the patterns and guessing the nature of omens. Always careful not to miss the forest for the trees. Soothsayers can find certain, though often not safe, paths to a particular outcome, and the true masters among them can rearrange the web of UNDONE itself, with potentially terrible consequences, so, be careful when you do this, or just don't do it, that's the best way. Bunks for this art include anything you associate with divination, right? Like looking into a crystal ball, analyzing the stock market, consulting the I Ching, taking mushrooms, making a horoscope, finding patterns in the crumbs at the bottom of the crisps bag, listening to the ramblings of a crackhead and trying to make sense of them, or meditating while burning incense in contemplative silence. Spirit Link is an art particular to the Nunnehi of North America, who have lost much of their connection to the dreaming, but who instead have always been rather more connected to the world of spirits, the Umbre, specifically the middle and lower Umbre, the worlds of nature spirits and the world of the dead. It allows one to perceive and parley with spirits, pacify them, and potentially even control them, though this usually comes with a great cost, because spirits don't really love being controlled. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it is true. Bunks for this art include going to a sweat lodge, going out alone into the wilderness and just soaking in its beauty, dancing and singing songs, making a sacrifice to pay tribute, or in, some more like non-traditional ways, holding a seance, calling 666 on the telephone, talking to a stone that looks like some type of animal, or carving and adorning a human skull with finery. Spring is one of the 4 seasonal arts, symbolizing fertility, growth, and new beginnings. It can make crops, love, creativity, anything really, grow and blossom. It can be used to heal and revitalize even the harshest of wounds, and in the hands of true masters, even bring back the dead, though only for a limited amount of time. Bunks for this art include having sex in a public space, smearing your juices and ejaculates on something, throwing a seed bomb, chewing on some flower petals, pouring a mixture of chalk, honey, and spring water on the ground, laughing light-heartedly, making a wreath, helping a butterfly out of its chrysalis, or just, it being spring. Summer is another of the 4 seasonal arts, symbolizing freedom, emotion, passion, safety, and ease. It is an art with which to weave the promise of endless adventure, like, the summers that would never end. Cloak yourself in ineffable allure, or drive everyone's emotions up the wall. Summer gives respite and comfort from the cold, but it can also burn with heat and flame, making it a very versatile art, especially suited for going toe-to-toe with banality itself. Bunks for this art include dousing yourself in cool water on a hot day. The hot day part is the important bit here. Toiling in the grass, going on a hike to discover a new place, watching the wheat fields in their prime, making insect calls, soaking up the light of day for a nice tan, frying an egg on the hood of your car, and of course, it being summer. Talecraft is the art of storytelling, so powerful it is realer than reality itself. Originally developed and spread around the world by the Eshu, few changelings are actually particularly good at this art, which is a shame because it allows one to understand the world as it is told by the stories of the people who inhabit it. Which often contain more truth than the simple data of truth itself, right? They get people talking. You can enrapture crowds with stories. The greatest of talecrafters can even imbue people with the qualities of story heroes, and make up contrivances so convenient they couldn't possibly be real. Except that they are. Bunks for this art include doing the tapping noise on you like this on your microphone, spending a weekend locked in your attic, writing, having a series of long conversations with your audience, asking a rowdy crowd to be quiet, theatrically unrolling a long scroll, warming up your vocal cords by spouting nonsense, or smashing a glass to get everyone's attention. Wayfare is the art of moving in dreamlike ways, whether oneself or others, to make a mockery out of the laws of space, and by extension, time. Wayfare allows you to run up the facade of a skyscraper, duck out of the way of a speeding bullet, walk through walls, make your way deep into the dreaming, and 100 other things. Just be careful when you use it. Not only is it often obvious, you might not always necessarily end up where you expected. Or even worse, you might get into a place you realize all too late you didn't actually want to enter at all. Bunks for this art include intently staring at your destination, telling Google Maps, nah, putting up a life-sized poster of a doorway, destroying a compass, downing a lightning-themed energy drink, putting on those shoes with the fiery wings on them, putting a bouncy spring in your mouth, or dragging your foot across the floor like you're about to charge. Winter is the last of the seasonal arts, and quite literally the darkest, though not ethically the darkest. Popular mostly with the Unseelie Court, winter governs cold, both literally and metaphorically, allowing practitioners to cool down both the tea and the heated tempers in the room. You can freeze emotions and even put things into a sort of cryostasis, but also create, in a way, objects out of magical ice, and also create the primal fear of the dark nights of winter. Bunks for this art include chewing on ice cubes and mint, being utterly unfazed by your enemies, standing absolutely still, or perhaps deliberately shivering, that's also an option, which once again I cannot demonstrate, drawing a snowflake, turning off a heat source, harshing someone's mellow, singing a Christmas carol, deliberately frightening someone, and of course, say it with me, it being winter. And so those are the main arts, the arts that are common with a capital C, though not necessarily common in, not a lot of people know all of these. The point is that they're arts that any changeling can, in theory, learn. The same is not true about the noble arts, which are associated with the construct of nobility, and thus, because social constructs have enormous power in the dreaming, can only be practiced by nobles. Most of these nobles, and historically all of them, have been Sidhe, but nowadays there are some Sidhe who are not nobles, and there are individuals of commoner Kiths who are nobles. Do be advised that there's two possible ways to run this in your game, right? You can either say, commoners can never wield noble arts, period, because the dreaming forbids it. That is a valid way of running it. But you could also say commoners can learn and wield noble arts, the nobles just don't like that very much and may even punish them for it. That's entirely within the scope of the game, and the lore is actually a bit split on which of these is actually the case. I personally prefer the latter. It seems to be the more current one in the modern edition, with the caveat that learning noble arts as a commoner is especially difficult and requires you to pay some sort of high price. Chronos is the art of mastering the flow of time. Even at low levels, it is incredibly useful to investigators, as it allows one to catch glances of the past. But as you move on, you can halt, speed up, and very rarely even reverse time. If you've ever been in this situation, right, you want to make fried rice, but you forgot to make rice the day before, so you can't use day-old rice, which you should always do when making fried rice. Do not use fresh rice for it, it won't be the same. Chronos is a lifesaver. Bunks for this art include turning back the handles of a clock, burning a calendar, doing the Black Lodge thing where you talk backwards, walking backwards with intent and confidence, recreating the circumstances, doing something on a particular day, giving away an old photograph, or taking out an ad in tomorrow's paper, congratulating yourself on a job well done. Contract is the art of the deal. Making it, that is, not closing it, but inscribing its terms onto the very fabric of the dreaming. Anyone can make a promise, but you need someone who knows contract if you want to truly make a binding oath. Wielders of this power have an intuitive sense of when contracts they have sanctified are broken, and may enact punishment against those who break them. If an oath is deep and or hard enough to uphold, they can also make the dreaming itself support those bound by it in their efforts to uphold it. Bunks for this art include each party reciting the oath they're about to enter thrice, making the paper a contract is written on from a sacred tree, signing with a very expensive pen and then chucking it into the ocean, wrapping a silk rope around the handshake, sitting at a legendary negotiation table, or not speaking for 3 days before sanctifying the deal. Dreamcraft is the art of, well, crafting dreams. This, of course, includes things in the dreaming itself, mainly by altering the significance of elements in the dreaming. It allows one to do pretty much anything, from finding a trod that may never have been there in the first place, to weaving chimera from scratch, and is, as of the current edition of Changeling, defunct. Its various abilities included in other arts, which in my opinion was a good design choice because this particular art is, in my opinion, it just lacks flavor, you know? It's just everything superpower for nobles. I don't like it. Because of this, we're not going to discuss it any further. Dragon's Ire is the art of battle, the power of the noble knight, the gallant hero, the terrible beast of war, which allows users to manifest unspeakable strength, slither across the battlefield like a viper, make their weapons indestructible, unleash destructive energy, which doesn't even have to be Dragon's Breath. Really anything that fits as destructive energy, dark matter if you want to, and you can fight with the knowledge of 100 ancient generals. This art is one of the major strategic reasons why the Shea nobles were so quick to reclaim their old territories. Bunks for this art include letting out a fearsome battle cry, anointing your gun with ash, walking through a blazing fire, making a display of superhuman strength, flourishing your blade, announcing to your enemies that you're about to destroy them, defiling a fallen enemy's corpse, or putting poison in your mouth that you then spit out. Naming is the art of understanding and altering the true meaning of things. It allows you to learn the true names of any person or object, and barring that, the true meaning of every communication, no matter how foreign or ancient the language. Because names and descriptions are so powerful in the dreaming, true masters of this art can change the attributes, and eventually even the very nature, the essence of things, by altering their names and what they mean. Bunks for this art include, of course, speaking the true name of something and or writing it down, but also painting runes in the sky with contrails, speaking a name backwards 7 times, or writing the name that you're trying to... Look at this. This is when you have a name, and it doesn't matter how I hold this, it still reads as my name. I hope the camera is focusing on this because I can't really show it. Thank you, Fox, for giving this to me at the last meetup. I still treasure it. Sovereign is the art of ruling, of rules, command, and proper protocol. The most exalted of the noble arts, the Sidhe once used this to command commoners, as having a higher rank in a certain context makes using it easier. But it's also useful for giving orders to non-Fae or forbidding pretty much anything from doing anything. For instance, right, you can forbid your personal safe from opening for anyone but yourself, or order a hurricane to change course toward the kingdom of your enemies. Bunks for this art include simply acting as though you should be in charge, wearing finery and regalia, having a herald proclaim your titles, holding court in a formal setting, making your subjects kneel, unfurling the banner of your house as you make a proclamation, or giving orders while standing at the highest point of your domain. And now, finally, we get to the dark arts, the forbidden arts, the arts the Seelie Court never employs. Except when they totally do. The Unseelie Court sometimes employs, and the Tharlane employ at every opportunity. A crucial thing to note about these is that they're mostly mechanically defunct in the newest edition of Changeling. They're not a valid category anymore. The culture of their usage has also changed, and the arts themselves have often changed, so consider this whole section to be a bit apocryphal. Plus, the actual forbiddenness of any of these arts themselves vary, right? Some are just considered distasteful and you may be shunned if you use them, while others will result in your immediate banishment from Changeling society at the slightest suspicion. Where you are, whom you serve, and who catches you in the act are also very relevant factors. Autumn, for instance, used to be one of these back when this was a relevant category. We talked about it before, as did Oniromancy, but especially the latter has changed entirely mechanically, and really has nothing to do with what it used to. Contempt is the art of jesting and tomfoolery, undermining the rules of nobility and dispensing with protocol. Contempt is like the anti-sovereign, a rebellious mirror that allows one to suspend the dreaming enforced etiquette, foment rebellion against the ruling class, and create quite a bit of chaos by gaining the ability to change oaths and agreements after they were written. Of course, this last part is especially preferred by the kinds of dishonest actors who would love to get one over on their rivals. Bunks for this art include openly mocking the rules of court, spitting in the face of an authority figure, speaking double talk, holding your fingers crossed behind your back, swallowing a dead snake, defacing a priceless artifact, inciting a mob, standing around in a circle, or tearing down a pulpit. Delusion is the art of untruth, not just deception and lies, but of falseness itself. It plays on the mists, right, the protective membrane or membranes of the dreaming, and is used to manipulate memories and perceptions, cloak intentions, and turn people's souls inside out to make them essentially into the opposite of themselves for a time. It is used by unseelie fae to abduct people, and sometimes a certain Dauntain to erase a changeling's memories of their fae selves. Bunks for this art include the plain and simple act of lying with great confidence, smashing a mirror, using Photoshop to alter someone's image, printing a book that purports to be about one thing but is actually about another thing entirely, putting on a mask, drinking a pipe vine infusion, grinding up a sapphire, or stealing tears from a child. Discord is the act of giving things names that, even though they do not age poorly, they certainly do not age well. It's really an art that mostly fae beings outside proper Kithane society use, often even like non-changelings, though changelings can learn it. And it's basically just Dragon's Ire, but it makes you faster. Like, it's not actually very interesting, it's defunct, so, I mean, this skimming it, mentioning it, I feel like is enough. So yeah, that's it. That's Changeling the Dreaming, I guess. This is more than just an overview, but it's also not super in-depth in spite of the length of what you've just witnessed. The way this particular game line is structured carries a depth that you cannot really shake, right? It's difficult to simplify because it is in and of itself already inherently simplified to the maximum extent that it can be which is not a lot. I tried to brush up on everything, but didn't even get into like a huge amount of stuff, especially the kinds of ancient and inherently ambiguous conspiracies that originate in the deep dreaming. Plus, the writing has changed a lot over the years. All in all though, I love Changeling. It introduces a level of inspired and inspiring magic that I find missing in our increasingly sterile and alienating late-stage capitalist world. So many of the things that we do, right, they're so mired in systems that seem to be entirely designed to drain them of their enjoyment and sense of wonder. Even the sorts of professions where you're supposed to see beyond the grey drudgery are overrun with banality. Oh, you're a scientist? Well, have fun spending half of your fucking time begging people for money so you can do science. You're an artist? More like you're a poor, and also you better not misstep or become the target of fraudulent copyright attorneys because they will weigh down your soul with iron chains. You're a garbage collector? Yeah, the only people who admire you are children. Children are stupid, nobody respects you or what you do, even though it is essential for society to function. Personally, I think that sort of reclaiming magic is an essential thing we need to do as a civilization, right? We've had it for most of our existence, and our feudal masters have used the dominance of rationalistic thought as an excuse to take it away from us, even as we discovered that we live in a universe more miraculous than any prophet on mushrooms had ever imagined. I really think that the surge in popularity in Zen philosophies that are all about like letting go of your expectations is at least somewhat related to like the fact that everything you can do in society has become inherently dissatisfying. Even if you feed the homeless, the police will give you a fine. Colors have been verifiably disappearing. You can look this up, right? In an age where every conceivable pigment is easy to create, we have fewer and fewer colors. And I talk a lot on this channel about capitalism and the actual policy and alternate system means to fight it. But really, the thing I feel the absence of the most in my soul is magic, hope, optimism. The idea that you could do something and it might work. You know, the everyday fewer people have that. Every branch of the arts is corrupted by the tendrils of banality, right? Being evil is what gets you ahead, even though that is fundamentally incongruent with what it means to be human. It's been really eye-opening to read this book and view the phenomena of our world through its lens, right? I never had a word for this feeling of the very essence of my being just suffocating under the dusty blanket of this world, but now I know that this is banality. And I fucking hate it. Thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities. Consider buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection up there. And in that spirit, do you remember how I used to say that Mage is Schizophrenia, the game of World of Darkness? You know, in the type of like, very politically incorrect analogy where Wraith is depression, Vampire is psychopathy, and Werewolf is anger issues. Yeah, so I've changed my mind on this. Changeling is schizophrenia, like 100%. It fits so perfectly. You got the seeing a weird dream world and the fucking connecting things by being very loosely associated. I would also like to formally reclassify Mage as autism, which I love. You know, it's about having an idiosyncratic worldview so powerful that it literally overrides reality. And that rules. Shout out to my many autistic fans. You're the magical people, and I love you. And see you around, cunts.